All right. Hi there, everyone. Welcome to the first open meeting of the National Academy's Committee on Independent Scientific Review of Everglades Restoration Progress, also known as CERP. This is the 2026 Biennial Review. My name is Helen Regan. I'm a conservation biologist and professor at the University of California, Riverside. I can have the next slide. Thanks. There another slide?
Yeah, sorry, Helen. Give me 1 second. It just got put away.
Sorry, it's very early for me.
Sam has no excuse.
There we go.
Slide 2, please. Thanks. So this consensus study was mandated in the Water Resources Development Act of 2000, which launched the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, also known as CERP, and it's sponsored by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Department of Interior, and the South Florida Water Management District. In response to this mandate, the CERP is charged to produce a biennial report that addresses these 4 items. Next slide, please. It's mandated to assess progress in restoring the natural system, discuss significant accomplishments of the restoration, discuss and evaluate scientific and engineering issues that may impact natural system restoration progress, and review monitoring and assessment protocols for evaluation of CERP progress. Today's meeting is the first of the committee's information gathering sessions that will be held over the next year as the committee works to finalise its report by September 2026. Could you please move to the next slide, Sam? This slide lists dates for the committee's future in-person meetings in Florida, and you can learn more about the study and sign up for the mailing list at this website. And also it's linked in this QR code that's on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. Additionally, members of the public can always submit feedback on the project via our website, which is listed here in the slide. Next slide, please. So here is our roster committee of members for the 2026 review who have volunteered their time to participate in this process. I'd like to have them turn on their cameras and introduce themselves. And I've already introduced myself, and I'm the chair of this committee. And we'll just go down alphabetically, starting with Casey Brown, please.
I think a few people are having trouble joining, and Casey is one of them.
Okay, let's start with John Calloway.
John is trying to get there. I do know Matt Cohen is on.
Should I just go ahead?
Yes.
Sure. Matt Cohen. I'm a professor at the University of Florida and director of UF's Water Institute.
Is Phil here? I'm not seeing Phil.
He is. Oh, sorry. What?
I am on, but I'm on the open meeting. Hi, I'm Philip Dixon. I'm a statistician at Iowa State University.
Charlie here? Let's see, Charlie. Margaret?
I'm Margaret Gita. I'm professor of agricultural and biological engineering at Purdue University and the director for the Institute for a Sustainable Future.
Well, I didn't see Bill on here.
Bill was unable to make it. We can go back to Casey Brown. Casey is here.
Hi, Casey. You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, sure. Thanks, Helen. Hi, everyone. Casey Brown. I'm a water resources engineer and hydroclimatologist at the University of Massachusetts, and I'm a returning member. Great to meet everyone.
Catherine?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I was having trouble joining, just FYI. I think a few other people, what I was on wouldn't allow me to speak. And anyway, hi. I'm delighted to be on this committee. I'm Kathy Kling. I'm an environmental economist at Cornell University.
Thanks. Tracy?
Everyone, my name is Tracy Quirk, and I am a wetland ecologist and associate professor in the Department of Oceanography and Coastal Sciences at Louisiana State University.
Denise Reed?
Good morning, everybody. My name's Denise Reed. I'm a coastal geomorphologist. I am affiliated with the University of New Orleans.
Chad?
Thanks, Helen. Good morning, everybody. My name is Chad Smith. I'm president of Headwaters Corporation.
Alan?
Good morning, Al Steinman. I am an aquatic ecologist at the Annis Water Resources Institute at Grand Valley State University. And returning, like Casey.
Is Jeff here? Oh, yeah, I see him.
Where are we? Am I supposed to introduce myself?
Yes, please.
I'm Jeff Walters. I'm in the Department of Biological Sciences at Virginia Tech, returning committee member.
And Denise, thanks.
Hi, Denise Wardrop. I'm Executive Director of the Chesapeake Research Consortium and a research professor of geography and ecology at Penn State University. I'm a returning committee member after the last cycle sabbatical.
And John Calloway has joined us. John.
Good morning. I'm John Calloway. I'm Professor Emeritus at University of San Francisco, and I'm a wetland ecologist and returning from the last round.
Thanks, everyone. Could I have the next slide, please, Sam? Thank you. So the goal of today's meeting is to hear from a range of perspectives on issues the committee should explore in its 2026 report, particularly focusing on scientific and engineering issues that may impact natural system restoration progress. This includes hearing from the public. If you did not sign up for public comment on email but still wish to provide comment, we will take comments from raised hands at the end of the meeting. But first, we'll hear from representatives of our sponsors with feedback on recent National Academies reports. They've been asked to share their reflections on what kinds of recommendations have been the most useful or impactful, with a particular emphasis on the last report, the 2024 report, and if any findings or recommendations missed the mark. The panelists in the first session include Tim Breen from the Fish and Wildlife Service, and I apologise in advance if I mispronounce people's names. We'll just put it down to my accent. Zulamet Vega Liriano from the US Army Corps of Engineers, Jenna May from Recover, Jennifer Reynolds from the South Florida Water Management District, Stephanie Romaniak from the USGS, and Eric Stabenow from National Park Service. And I think we should just go alphabetically as I just read out the names. Is that okay with the panelists?
Sure.
All right, awesome. Thank you. So we'll start with Tim Breen, and the prompts were sponsor feedback on the 2024 CERP Biennial Review. What kinds of recommendations have been most useful and or impactful to the restoration program? And did any findings or recommendations miss the mark? Thank you.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Okay, so I'm Tim Breen, and I'm the acting Everglades program supervisor for the Fish and Wildlife Service in Vero Beach. And I've been acting in this role for about a month at this point, although I've been in the Everglades program for about 10 years. And hopefully my comments will will hit the mark. This is the first time I think that I'm providing comments as a panelist, so we'll see how well I do here. I guess I wanted to start off with maybe a reminder for most folks and maybe new information for some folks about what the mission of the Fish and Wildlife Service is, so the agency that I work for. So the mission of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is working with others to conserve, protect, and enhance fish, wildlife, plants, and their habitats for the continuing benefit of the American people. And I think that it's important for people to know that, because that's where that's my perspective. And I think we all have missions, and it's good to sort of start off with that. Couple general comments from the 2024 report. I noticed there were a number of places in the report where staffing constraints were mentioned. And, that's certainly an issue and will continue to be an issue, especially for the federal agencies as we go through reorganizations and downsizing. So, staffing has been an issue in the past, and again, it'll continue to be an issue, certainly for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And in the past, we've, as an example with CERP, we've been unable to sort of fully engage in some of the reviews. We do provide input, but we haven't really been able to fully engage. And then the last general comment that I would make, one of the prompts was, any findings or recommendations that miss the mark. And I guess I'd like to say that, it's my comments not necessarily about missing the mark, because I don't think much of the information misses the mark. It's just that Everglades restoration is so complex that no matter what we have in these reports, we're going to miss stuff, right? Or it's never that straightforward. We're dealing with a really complex ecosystem here, and then I'll add this question. If we get the water right, if we move the water in the way that we want to, but the habitat and the fish and wildlife species composition are not functioning, how successful have we been at Everglades restoration? It's a question that we think about a lot. It's more about just the water. It's about ensuring that the ecosystem is functioning. So now I've got a few maybe specific items I'd like to discuss from the restoration progress portion of the report. One of the section titles was "Sizable Restoration Benefits are Evident from Recent Progress on CERP New Water, Picayune Strand, and the Melaleuca Eradication Projects." And I'm going to focus on Picayune Strand. We've had a biologist stationed, identified as lead for Picayune Strand for a couple of decades. So we've been heavily involved with Picayune Strand, and so we're pretty familiar with that project. One of the quotes from the report was, "Restoration of hydrology in Picayune Strand appears to be generating benefits to the local flora and fauna, with vegetation and macroinvertebrate communities responding favorably." True. That's a true statement. And so I would say, yeah, that's true. Another statement from actually, I went back to the 2022 report. Restoring the pre-drainage hydrology should bring multiple ecological and environmental benefits, including an increase in the spatial extent of wetlands, decreased frequency and intensity of forest fires, increased habitat for endangered species such as the wood stork and Florida panther, and a reduction in invasive, native, and exotic species. Also true from the 2022 report talking about Picayune Strand. But I'll say yes and, right? There's always yes and. There's still some challenges, right? Even at Picayune Strand, which is a very successful project, and really good stuff is happening there. It's a 55,000 acre restoration site. I look at it kind of as unique. There's a handful of other projects that have restoration as the title of the project, right? The Kissimmee River restoration, Loxahatchee watershed restoration, and there's a number of other ones. But Picayune is one of the first ones sort of getting to this final stage. And so I think it's an opportunity for us to look at it and really think about some of the challenges and what we can do. Back in the early 2000s, the service and the Corps identified Picayune Strand as a place where we felt we could mitigate impacts to panther habitat throughout the South Florida ecosystem. So for all CERP projects, Picayune Strand would act as a mitigation area essentially to offset those impacts. And the Picayune Strand generates sufficient panther habitat benefits to offset the impacts from all those projects. So we knew that up front. It's such a large site that we could offset those impacts, and so we all agreed to do that. But given that there are challenges associated with Picayune Strand, just in the last 4 or 5 years, over 100 pythons have been removed from Picayune Strand, some of them really large. The white-tailed deer population on Picayune Strand, I don't know that we have a really good feeling of what's going on there with the deer population. And that population is important for a number of reasons, not only for local users, but also for panthers, right? You can't have panther habitat without prey. And so I think there's some opportunities maybe for us to do some more work there, getting a feel for what's going on with panther or with white-tailed deer as one of the primary panther prey items. And then the last comment I'd have on Picayune Strand is the long-term vegetation management is extremely important. It can act as panther habitat if we've got a lot of exotics and invasive species taking over. It's not functioning, like I said earlier. We got to make sure these places are functioning. And so the agencies are working together. The district and the Corps and the service and Florida Forest Service have been working on a vegetation management plan. And we need to keep working on that and find committed funding that will support that those efforts into the future. We're not going to be finished with Picayune in the next year or so and then leave it and move on. We've got to continue to work at some of these things, and vegetation management, invasive and exotics, is going to be really important. The next item that I'll mention is, again, from the restoration progress section, and this is under the title of the initial monitoring results indicate that the COP has been a restoration success, generally meeting expectations and achieving hydrological and ecological restoration objectives and improving conditions in the Central Everglades relative to previous water management. Also a true statement. A quote from that section of the report: the changes wrought by the COP have revealed some issues with water quality and confirmed anticipated adverse effects on endangered Cape Sable seaside sparrows. The latter issue requires creative solutions sooner rather than later. And so, again, true. And we're doing some of that stuff right now. Again, the agencies are working together, the district, the Corps, the service, the Miccosukee tribe, and we're proposing the establishment of a conservation breeding and reintroduction program for Cape Sable seaside sparrows. And the goal of that program is to enhance conservation of wild populations through the release of captive bred birds. And the effort is intended to help minimize further decline of the Cape Sable seaside sparrow. And so, again, it's a good example of things that we're doing to work together to hit that issue that was brought up in the report. Creative solutions sooner than later. And I'll point out that another species of importance to the Everglades snail kite, which the water conservation areas are actually critical habitat. Over the last 20 years, in those areas, there's only been 5 years where kites have actually nested, or excuse me, let me restate that. In the last 20 years, there were 5 years with no nesting at all in WCA 3A, and 5 years where nests failed to produce any young. So half of the time, it's not functioning for Everglades snail kite. And so that's an issue that we all need to be thinking about moving forward. And modeling during the planning process for the COP showed improvement to hydrologic conditions for the sparrow, wood stork, wading birds, Everglades snail kite. But some of those have not been seen, and so we're going to continue to work together to see those improvements. And I would suggest that Marl Prairie is important to the ecosystem, just like, white-tailed deer, tree islands, and other habitats are important to the ecosystem. And so we need to make sure that moving forward, Marl Prairie continues to be a part of the South Florida ecosystem. And time check, I just want to make sure I'm not going over my time. Where am I at with time?
If you could pass to the next person, and then if we have time at the end,
Okay.
look back.
Okay, perfect. I'm good for now. And then if I have additional comments and there's more time, I'll speak up later, but thank you.
Okay, Zulamit, you're up next.
Good morning, everyone. Sound check.
Good.
Can you guys hear me? Okay, perfect. The sound is gonna be coming through Dina Ralph, but I have my video also available. So I will go ahead and start with the most useful recommendations. I think that the recommendation of reinforcing the need of multi-agency reporting of benefits is very valuable, and we take it by heart. The first point that I want to make is that the biennial report feedback always help us validate the great work that we're doing at the project level. Like in the case of the Central Everglades Planning Project, New Water and Picayune Strain coverage. The write-up help us validate what we're seeing on the ground. In the case of CERP New Water, more water is being retained in Central Everglades due to the construction of the seepage management. And in the case of Picayune, we're seeing the changes in the landscape by reconnecting and hydrating the landscape and filling the canals and adding pump stations to drive the water where it needs to be. However, we know that we need to do better in communicating that progress. The recommendation on multi-agency reporting of project levels outputs was heard loud and clear. We started in the 2024 system status report, linking these projects to indicators and outlining areas in which we're seeing or expecting to see benefits. And now in the 2025 report to Congress, which is currently in development, we're building upon that. We're targeting a high-level reporting on incremental benefits for completed or partially completed projects, such as Picayune Strand, Kissimmee River Restoration, C-111 Spreader Canal, and Biscayne Bay Coastal Wetlands Phase 1. Another really good, valuable recommendation is the reinforcing of the need of research on biochemical effects from geochemical effects from CERP. In this one, partnership is key. There are some times in which we need our non-federal partners and other stakeholders to help us fill some areas of opportunity that we can reach. Like in the case of the additional research that is currently ongoing under the collaboration of the state and the Engineering Research and Development Center, or ERDIC, which is investigating further the interaction of pre-treated injection water into Florida non-drinking aquifers for ecosystem restoration purposes. In the case of recommendations missing the mark, which is, they're not really missing the mark, it's just that it's just part of our federal process. Sometimes in those recommendations, there's items that are not part of our ongoing authorizations. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers rule by specific authorities and is focused on mission execution. Congress provides the authorizations and funding, and we follow through. Therefore, we often need to read through the recommendation list of the National Academy report, which the federal government glasses, sorting what items are within our authority. Thus, we have limitation on the items we can act on. But nevertheless, we're constantly looking at opportunities and if they can be incorporated in our ongoing products. all this is tied up to funding constraints, as you may think, and it was mentioned about the resources too, which is a reality that will not go away. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Next up is Jenna May from Recover.
Just a quick sound check.
Yep.
All right, great. Good morning, everyone. Jenna May. I'm a biologist with the Corps, but speaking on behalf of Restoration Coordination Verification, or Recover. I'm also part of the Recover Executive Committee. So I guess from the Recover perspective, what we found really helpful from the 2024 report were specifically the recommendations related in the application of tools to evaluate the effects of climate change section. This was really helpful just because there's a lot of things that we know that we need to do within Recover in terms of, data gathering and analyses. But those sort of lists of priorities that were raised by the CERP group were really helpful for us to kind of narrow into some specific topics. And so what we've done with that information is provided it to our Recover leadership group to kind of mull over and figure out where Recover can fit in to support some of those different initiatives. And so that was really helpful to sort of help us focus and prioritize our limited resources and sort of help us with our planning in terms of what we want to do in the coming years. And then another point I would just bring up, what's really helpful about these reports is that they elevate certain issues and bring to light some different things that maybe if just within Recover, if we said it, it wouldn't get heard as much. And so a couple of the items I just wanted to highlight were in the restoration progress section. And so one of the excerpts from the report indicated that information on natural system restoration progress relative to expectations and project objectives remains difficult to find and interpret. So basically, just trying to find those expectations of projects and how they're related to the objectives and kind of the different progress that we're seeing. I think we can do better at telling those stories, and also kind of highlights another opportunity for Recover to work with the projects to help assess that progress and also inform future adaptive management needs. So we appreciated sort of that getting raised. And then just sort of a note about the effects of restoration flows on biogeochemical dynamics. That particular issue was something that was highlighted in our 2015 programmatic adaptive management plan. So appreciated that also getting raised for the public and folks that consume the report to see. So that was a couple of the points that I wanted to bring up. We're kind of tag teaming this within Recover. I'm tag teaming this with Stephanie Verhulst, who's our adaptive management lead, and she was going to speak to maybe some of the feedback on the adaptive management section.
All right, so good morning. I don't have a camera necessarily on me, but I'm sitting next to Jenna and Zulamet. There you go, there. Hello, everyone. So from the Recover adaptive management viewpoint, looking through some of the recommendations and just the information provided in the report, were all really valid points. You hit a lot of need for communication and better communication between projects, the public, and within the CERP community. And we definitely understand and see these challenges as they continue to happen. One of the things that the adaptive management team has recently undertaken is updating the framework for CERP adaptive management to try to put in place and to communicate some of this, the SOPs that we have developed in the past and get them out to the project teams and the CERP community, like project recover, project managers, trying to cover all of those individuals that would be involved in adaptive management, either at the project level or programmatic level. So we do want to acknowledge and appreciate the recognition of communication and the importance of it. One of the other things that you mentioned in the report was that the programmatic adaptive management has not been implemented in a much manner at all. And one of the things that we've tried in the last few months and a lot of effort from Recover is to start moving forward and gaining project proposals for a programmatic adaptive management. Hopefully we can initiate some of these efforts in the next fiscal year, and that we can then be able to share that information over the coming years at the two projects, as well as across Recover in different settings or different systems. We also, in the report, you outlined the building blocks of adaptive management. And I think this is a really important thing to continue to stress and emphasize, that there's different components of adaptive management that we need to remain vigilant in making sure we apply adaptive management appropriately and communicate it to projects, the public, so that they understand the use and the need for adaptive management. I think that was most of what I wanted to share. One of the other aspects was that you highlight in the 2015 CERP programmatic adaptive management plan the lack of target goals and thresholds that's in the document, and we as Recover have hopefully able to move forward and apply resources as we have them, whether it's through manpower or the technical skills of our team, to be able to use information from the last 10 years to establish the thresholds, determine goals and targets, so that as we update the programmatic adaptive management plan in the coming months and years, that we can put actual values and targets for adaptive management.
Thank you. Next up is Jennifer Reynolds.
Hi, good morning. I'm Jennifer Reynolds. I'm the Director of Ecosystem Restoration at the South Florida Water Management District. And I'll try to keep my comments brief because I know we still have several more speakers at this portion. But I wanted to talk for a moment about how important the CISREP committee and your report is, right? This is an anticipated report every 2 years that is anticipated not just by Congress, but by the public as well. And so your words are really important and they matter. And so I wanted to share that. Those of you who are returning members of the committee, you know that. And although our public meetings that you host are not often widely attended, they do have attendance by the public. Many of our stakeholders are attending those, as well as listening online, either live or to the recordings. And so all the interactions are important. And along with that, because of the breadth of your experience and what you bring to the table, the interaction with our staffs is also important. And so although you're a small committee, you're a big committee, right? So you're a big committee in terms of the breadth of your experience and your knowledge and what you can bring to the Everglades, either through the experience that you have working with the Everglades or with your experience working in other areas. And those things are really valuable. And so we really value the interaction that our staffs have with the committee. There are things that don't end up in the report, but that end up in the Everglades program. And so that's an additional value that I think this process brings to the table. And so we really appreciate that, and we thank you for that. So along with that, reinforcing the role of science, this is one of the things that I think is super important that the report brings every 2 years, I was going to say every year, is that it reinforces the role of science in the Everglades. And so when you talk about things like monitoring and pilot studies and research and how the agencies use that information to make decisions, to add value to the program, to save the taxpayer money, right? And we're making decisions based on sound science. And that science costs money and it takes time to get there, but it's important, and it's important in real time. That's super valuable in the report. And I think it's really meaningful, especially to our congressional members and committees who are looking at this report, wanting to make sure that the process is bringing value to the American people, not just in the result of the Everglades, but also in the result of the cost effectiveness of the program and how we're delivering it. And so places where you talk about that in your reports, I think is super valuable. Also, making sure that when you talk about the science, you're really accurate, that you use accurate terms and ways that you talk about it. One thing that we had a disagreement on in this last report, there was an area in the report where you talked about phosphorus concentrations at the south end of the system. And this is sort of where science and policy also sometimes get entangled. And so I'd like to take just a moment and talk about this because I think it's important, especially for new members of the committee, to understand some of the nuances here. And so when you talked about in the report that there was I think the words were a slightly increasing trend in phosphorus concentrations at the south end of the system, but that the numbers were statistically insignificant. Those words matter a lot in terms of policy, because how we deal with nutrients, especially in the south end of the Everglades system, has a lot of policy implications. So we have lawsuits, consent orders, monitoring, compliance that are all entangled. And so words matter, and how we talk about it really matters. And so, and I bring this up for two reasons. One is we get very little time to review the final report. And so that collaboration with you along the way is really important, so we can make sure that you fully understand some of those entanglements as you're thinking about things that you're going to write about. Because when we get the final report, it's really hard for us to make changes, both because of your process and because of the time constraints. And so we want to make sure that you have a good understanding of how we view things and how, and by we, I mean all the agencies, and I'll get to that point in my next point, actually, and make sure that along the way, you have a comprehensive understanding of our data. And if there's areas that you don't understand our data or don't understand why we're specific about certain things, we want to make sure that we can provide that information to you. And then the second thing that I'd like to mention is that sometimes the policy issues that get entangled with things that are written about in the report, the agencies don't all agree. And so I'd like you to just be careful about making sure that as you look at different issues, that you check with multiple agencies on a particular issue. And I'll use the tribal chapter as an example from the last report. It was very heavy on the Miccosukee tribe's perspective, and the Seminole tribe's perspective was not as included, although their perspective was included in other parts of the report on other issues. Likewise, the Corps' tribal liaison was quoted multiple times in that report, but the South Florida Water Management District's tribal liaison was not. And so then that gives a different perspective, and we have different perspectives on things and different relationships with the tribes. The federal responsibility with the tribes is different than some of the state responsibilities, and they're both important. And when you put them all together, they make a comprehensive picture. And so we felt that chapter could have been improved by a little bit more comprehensive discussions with additional folks. And we understand that time constraints and people's responsiveness to the committee might not have made that possible, but it sometimes leaves the perspective incomplete. And so that was an area that we think we'd like the committee just to be cognizant of. So those are our comments for this portion. Thank you.
Thanks for that feedback. Now we are on to Stephanie Romanek.
Good morning. So I've met many of the committee members over the years in my capacity as a research scientist with the USGS. And just to let you know that at the moment I'm doing two jobs. So in addition to research scientist, I am here today in my capacity in my second job, which is acting science advisor for South Florida for the USGS. And that's a role that you've been used to seeing Nick Alman in for the last decade or so. So we'll see what the future holds, but I'm standing in at that job as well. So from a USGS perspective, the committee is aware that we aim to provide relevant science to help with restoration planning through research, monitoring, and modeling. And so our comments are sometimes really focused on the science portion. And so in particular, we really appreciated the section on tools for evaluating the impacts of climate change. The committee made some really important points on sea level rise, and this isn't the first time the committee has looked at that, and this information is always really useful in helping us think about what's coming and how we can engage and help with restoration, the science for restoration planning. And so some of those points were on how sea level rise is already impacting distributions of species. And so this is not a far off hypothetical series of events that might be coming. And so this is something that's really important for us to keep in mind. And these drivers are critical for us to be looking at. And this is already helping us put in place some of our upcoming 1 to 5 years of work. And there were some interesting points the committee made on things like sediment accretion as well, which we do both the research and modeling, or all three, monitoring and modeling on, and some good discussion of the interplay of those drivers like salinity and flow. And one of the biggest impacts in terms of some of our upcoming work was the section looking at the integration of further integration of physical and ecological models, and getting the ecological models ready to be able to forecast the impacts of climate change on those individual species and habitats. And I'll say more along these lines as we get into the next in the next panel. But this has been really useful for us in talking and working with our partners to get the science ready that needs to be in place for closer looks at Everglades restoration progress and future success. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie. And then finally, Eric Stabenow.
Good morning. Sound check. All right, good. I see some nods. All right, my name is Eric Stabenow. I'm with the National Park Service. I serve as a branch chief for restoration sciences at the South Florida Natural Resources Center, and I'm glad to get the opportunity to see you here again. There's some familiar faces on the committee, and I enjoyed having you down and having you take a good, fresh outside look at what we're doing down here. Sticking to the general topics you were looking for were some recommendations that were useful and some findings that might have missed the mark a little. We're working on that. Let's start on the positive side here. I think the ITEX section, we were having a conversation about the indigenous knowledge. I think at the timing of when you were doing the work on that section and the information that came out of that it hit the mark in a strong way for us. It really touched on the idea of the complexity of taking what's going to be an oral history and this personal sense and feel on the landscape and turning that into reproducible science that we can document and use in a process. That was brought up in there. I think that's a really important part, and I thank you for that. I think that as Jenna May had said, there was a great section in there on needing tools and recognizing that tools for climate change are really critical. And on our own DOI side, we recognize the same thing, that there's these needs to have a good set of our climate forecasts, and the work that was into the last report on the climate change aspects really touched on pretty much what we really needed to see on that, particularly as it's like bridging the monitoring to modeling gap, making sure that we're monitoring and getting the information we need in the right places and doing the right type of modeling out of that. Those then feed into other processes in the restoration program. What monitoring is important, how we prioritize our monitoring, how we keep that going. So having that recognized in these applied areas where we're doing the work of monitoring and using that information in the report is very useful for us. So I really appreciate that. There's a section on adaptive management. We had a nice coverage on that already with the team here, so I won't go much further other than to say that it in the report did a little bit about challenging the way adaptive management was being used, and one of the outcomes, I believe, of that directly, at least on our side of it, has been some serious training on how we define what adaptive management is, how do we use adaptive management, what adaptive management is not. So I think all of those type of conversations really came, again, rolling back the clock. It feels comfortable now, but I think it feels comfortable now because it was brought to the forefront 2 years ago when we were looking at this and talking about it and building this report. So this is a very important conversation to be having, and I appreciate that. There is a recommendation here I want to say about missing the mark, and I'll say this in the most positive way. I really appreciate the focus that the committee put on the integrated delivery schedule. That schedule has been critical for tracking what we're doing in Everglades restoration overall, for laying out what would be included in the next operating plan. For instance, we go to the schedule, we look at the plan, we look at the timeline, and we use that in the next step. It has been something that got attention, and there's been work from some of our agencies, from USACE in particular, to improve the way that delivery schedule is presented, the way it is shared, this idea of a dashboard, all great things, and really appreciate that focus. I think the piece that we could have put more effort on in there and shifted the way the wording worked on the document is something that can be applied to the next round as well, which is we should be thinking hard about the process behind that schedule, the communication behind how that schedule is developed, how early that schedule is expressed and shared with other teams. We feel in writing that it looks like we're all there together from step one, but in reality, we might be at DOI seeing that a little bit later in the process. And we'd like to be in there a little bit earlier in the process. And if we're not hitting that mark early enough in the process, if I'm misunderstanding that, then we'd like to understand it better so that we understand that our voice is being heard early on and as often as possible. So that's a little different than saying we're going to look at what the product looks like or improve the product. That is a process question. So in a general scheme, I think that that's something that the team could look at, not just for that item, but for processes in general, more than products, for how we get through the decision-making process more than the outcome of those processes. And that might be a very useful next step. And it would build off of what we've been doing in the previous reports. So that's all I have to share. I'll stay on board for questions. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Eric, and thanks everyone for your really valuable feedback. Stephanie assures me that even though we're a little over time, we do have time for a couple of questions from the committee. Are there any committee members who want to make a comment or ask a question? Yep, Denise.
Hey, Helen, thanks. I had a question for Jenna and Stephanie. Stephanie, you had mentioned that the team has updated the adaptive management framework. Is that a dynamic process or are you referring to a specific update? And I wasn't on the last round of the committee, so sorry if that question was answered during the process.
Yes, so the team has been working the last 3 or 4 months to update it. So it is dynamic. We have been improving our language, our framework, trying to ensure that it is appropriate on the level within Recover, making sure our team members, whether it's a project or the larger CERP team, it can fit within all of our realms. So I mean, like, it hasn't been publicized, it hasn't been like broadcast widely, because we are still ensuring that it hits the mark that we want it to, and then finding the mechanisms to make sure our team is on board with our updates.
Do you have a specific date where you thought that would happen? You'd be done?
Not a specific date.
And I would just add that it's also more of just fleshing out the details. The framework is, at the time was very conceptual and was our best guess of how things would work once CERP was implemented. But now there's been, core guidance that has come out since that framework was initially created. So it's really just kind of fleshing out those details and making it align so it's actually implementable, and we can use some of our existing processes to facilitate it a little better.
Thank you.
Thanks. Jeff?
Yes, I had a question for Timothy. Just a small question. This is the first I've heard of the captive rearing or Cape Sable Seaside Sparrows. How far along is that program?
Yeah, thanks for that question. We're still sort of in the planning phase, I guess I would say. We have not started anything yet. We're working with various locations to identify a captive breeding facility. We do have some funding that's been provided from some of the agencies, and so we're moving forward. But I would say we're still in the planning phase, and then we are hopeful to sort of move into the next phases, probably in the next year or so. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks. Phil?
Sorry, needed to unmute. Coming back to the question Denise just asked about the adaptive monitoring update, I remember in the last project, last cycle, there was information provided about workshops, refining monitoring goals. Is that sort of thing being included in the planning for the AM update?
So I think the workshops were maybe more related to our update of our monitoring and assessment plan, which will help to inform whether an adaptive management, action is needed. But that was more, those workshops were more related to updating our CERP monitoring and assessment plan.
And have you finished that updated monitoring plan, or do you have a date for completion?
Yeah, so we're in the process of it. It was a multi-step process. We're targeting FY26 to have it updated. We're currently going through an evaluation right now.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone. Just take a breath in and out. So next we're going to turn to a discussion of new issues for the 2026 CERP Biennial Review. And we have 9 representatives here to speak with us and share their perspectives on high priority issues for the committee to explore. The prompt is, what currently important restoration activities or issues would it be helpful for CERP to explore in its 2026 review? And the panel members for this session are Cassandra Armstrong or Stuart Van Horn from South Florida Water Management District, Laura Brandt from Recover, Tim Breen, Fish and Wildlife Service, Carlos Coronado Molina from South Florida Water Management District, Tabitha Alkington from the Corps, Jennifer Leeds, South Florida Water Management District, Melody Naja, I'm sorry if I've pronounced that incorrectly, National Park Service, Stephanie Romaniak from USGS. And let's go in reverse alphabetical order. So some people aren't always going last. So we'll start with Stephanie Romaniak.
Great, thanks. So I recognize that the committee has recently looked at a few aspects of climate change, not just in the last report, but before that as well. And as you point out, there are changes that we need to be prepared for in restoration planning. And with Biscayne Bay, the BBC project, we started getting closer to thinking about and planning for what coastal Everglades at least might look like with deeper water from sea level rise. And our interagency modeling center got close to being able to take that next step of predicting pore water salinities. And there were some challenges and setbacks, and so we're not there yet. But that exercise did bring a few things to light. And one that you point out is that not a lot of the ecological models that are used in restoration planning are ready to receive inputs like salinity. So even if we had that, a lot of those ecological predictive models aren't there yet. And that's something that the USGS is starting to work with the Army Corps on this year, and so we're hoping to make some progress there. And it'll be it won't be done in a year, but that's something that's going to be critical. And this brings the conversation, I think, to larger questions about the indicator species and habitats that we think about in restoration planning and thinking through what does successful restoration look like. And I have a couple of lines of questions. And one is, do we have information on what the impacts of saltwater intrusion, for example, are going to be? So what will saltwater intrusion and salinity do for Marl Prairie, just as an example? Is there a tipping point? And that's, I think, a question that we're going to want to be asking ourselves, is about these transitions. And is there a tipping point for saltwater intrusion or exposure for the plant community and its root zone? Do we have this knowledge? And that, you know, is something that I think the committee has pointed out before, that a lot of things that we know are from, you know, past times, and these are new questions. And so do we have this type of knowledge to be able to apply and forecast into the future? And that brings me to my last set of questions, which are how sensitive are our indicators to climate change? And can we detect change? And can we detect restoration success under natural variability when we think about what natural variability is going to look like under climate change? And so I think these are important questions that we need to be thinking through in terms of how we're talking about restoration progress, measuring success, and our ability to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we'll hand it over to Melody from National Park Service.
Good morning, everyone, and good morning to the committee members. I'm Melody Naja. I'm the director of the South Florida Natural Resources Center. So the SFNRC, in short, we are the science division within the Everglades National Park. We monitor the progress of restoration and the impacts and benefits on the South Florida National Parks and Preserve. First, I want to thank the committee, the new and the past members, for your work. It's not an easy process, right, to check what the progress of the restoration. It's a large project, it's a complicated project, but your insights are extremely helpful, not only for the public, for us as well. I agree with Jennifer, your report is very well read by all of us. It gives us an opportunity to pause and to reflect on our progress, right? What did we achieve during the last 2 years? So what are the topics that the National Park Service would like to have you focused on? I will share some projects and some processes. So the first project is BBCR. So it's the Biscayne Bay and Southeastern Everglades Ecosystem Restoration Project. So during the next 2 years, I'm hopeful that you will have a PIR or a draft PIR to review on this project. So all your comments evaluating this project, evaluating the 4 components, right? Timing, distribution, quality, and quantity for this project will be extremely helpful. How the plan is conveying the water, storing the water, how much additional water will be delivered to Biscayne National Park and to Biscayne Bay will be, like, your input on this will be extremely helpful. And also your feedback on what are the challenges. This is all modeling, right? But at the end of the day, we will be restoring an ecosystem that's facing the sea level rise with climate change. What are the unforeseen problems that we will see when we come to implement this project? I think your input on this will be very critical. Then another thing on BBCR is that from a storage perspective, from a water supply perspective, what did we miss? Is there an opportunity for a later on project or within this project to have an aquifer storage and recovery? Should be part of a process or like an additional water supply source. We're talking about reuse, wastewater reuse. Should this be part of any restoration project for Biscayne National Park? So that's for BBCR. The second project is the SPCU, the second periodic CERP update. I don't have any specific questions regarding the SPCU since it's still in the modeling phase. But I think your evaluation of the process, your evaluation of the modeling assumptions, and even like your evaluation of the results, right? How far are we from achieving, how far we would be on achieving CERP benefits and CERP targets with the second periodic CERP update. We know that there's climate change that should be incorporated in the SPCU or sea level rise. the lack of storage was much less ASRs, how these contributed to like, are we still able to achieve the benefits of CERP with climate change and with like less ASRs? So these are all good questions that we would like to have your feedback on through the report. Then from a process perspective, I know that during your past reports, you've been talking about the decon physical model and analyzing the results. And we all understand that this is an example of a successful example of adaptive management. But what we'd like to see is, you know, 2 weeks ago, Fred Clark came and presented about the decon physical model. And in his introduction, he said he is the last one standing that was involved in the decon physical model, or one of the last. That's scary for me, right? And it is, we're losing expertise, and we want someone to document the process. We want someone to let us know what was successful, what can we learn from the process so we can replicate it in the next decon physical model or next experiment that we can do in situ. So these are like all like questions that we'd like the committee to address in your, that you can address during the next CERP report. Another process is the IDS. So Eric Staben already mentioned about the IDS, and it is, for me, it's not about the outcome, right? It's about the process that is currently being used to come up with a result, with the IDS. So if you can check or review the decision framework to adjust sequencing or resource allocation for the CERP components. Are there any way that we can expedite some of the project components based on the ecological benefits or existing ecological conditions of the system? I know that back in 2019, you mentioned something like this. You were like asking these similar questions, like, can we do that? Can we advance some ITS, some components of restoration projects based on the ecological conditions or the impacts to some of areas, right? The southern estuaries were mentioned in your previous National Academy of Science Con, but no one like took this comment and brought it, like advance it as a potential that we can do it. So if you can in your next report, like focus more on this question, can we do that? Is there any other examples throughout the country that did that? It's not only based on funding and the appropriation of money, but it's based on the ecological conditions of the system. And can we prioritize some of these aspects versus the funding? And of course, like how can the agencies better communicate the constraints, right? I know that funding is a constraint. Schedules are a constraint. How can the agencies communicate to the public these constraints? Then my final two recommendations, the first one is dependencies between, in your previous reports, you were focusing on water quality, the dependencies between CERP and water quality. That's great. I think if you can focus on the next report on the dependency between CERP and CNSF flood resiliency study that the Corps is leading with the district. So the CNSF flood resiliency project footprint is basically within the BBC footprint. They share the two projects, the study and the BBC share water management features. They share the spatial extent. So how can we synchronize? How we can coordinate between, is there any dependencies between these two projects that we need to know about? So these are good questions that we would like to have your feedback on. And the second is we are all talking about the Cape Sable seaside sparrow. And there are several studies, not only the captive breeding, but there is a study on the future of marl prairie on the landscape with restoration and with sea level rise. I know that there are several studies that are currently being done with Stephanie's group, with the Army Corps, with Recover, within the National Park Service, about the future of the marl prairie, right? This is, we're talking 30, 50 years from now. Is there any future for marl prairie with restoration, with climate change? And your feedback on this topic will be really appreciated. And this is it from the National Park Service.
Thank you, Melody. We'll move on to Jennifer Leeds, please.
Good morning. My name is Jennifer Leeds. I'm the Bureau Chief of the Ecosystem Restoration Planning Group for the Water Management District. One of the topics that we were talking about here that we thought maybe the committee could consider would be what are some compatible ecosystem services for upland prairie or scrub habitats for restoration and other land use? And the reason why we asked that question is within CERP, one of the projects that we have is called the Indian River Lagoon South Project. So it is located just to the east of Okeechobee, Lake Okeechobee, between Lake Okeechobee and the Atlantic Ocean. It's primarily focused in Martin and St. Lucie County. The project itself is a myriad of above-ground storage reservoirs and constructed treatment wetlands, and the primarily focus is to capture basin runoff before it flows into the Indian River Lagoon South, right? And clean that water before it goes into the Indian River Lagoon. But a large focus of this project is what we call the natural lands component. And the natural lands is primarily upland, prairie, and scrub habitats, which are also upstream of the Indian River Lagoon. And we're talking close to 98,000 acres worth of natural land habitat. And so we were thinking that maybe the committee could consider what would be some compatible ecosystem restoration services? How do those services work with restoration and conservation efforts, given that these areas right now are currently in either ranching or farming? And so to help protect them from going into development, are there compatible uses that could be looked at that would help facilitate the restoration of these areas? The focus of the natural lands component is to look at it as a more of rain-driven system, not really taking water out of the system, but to hold that water on the land and conserve it. So are there other recreation uses as well? There are other areas within within CERP and CERP components, like north of Lake Okeechobee, where we see these types of upland and scrub and ranch lands and farming aspects, and all up and down the Kissimmee River. So we were thinking that it would be good to take a look at some of those, see how they fit in with restoration, but potential conservation of these lands that could be compatible with maybe some of the existing land uses and what some of those land uses could become. Again, a lot of these areas are upstream of the Indian River Lagoon. They drain into the local canal system that goes down there. Some of these areas, the water will be captured in these storage reservoirs before they go into Indian River Lagoon. And it's also meant to reduce some of the point source discharge that's happening in certain portions of the lagoon, and spread that out into a more historic pattern of how the water flowed into that Indian River Lagoon. So that was one of the areas that we thought that, if I recall, I don't know if the committee has focused on any of that in the past. They may have. So this might be a new area to consider. We're also seeing lands over off on the Western Everglades that this may be beneficial for. And again, also up north of Lake Okeechobee with the Lake-O Watershed Restoration Project, we have a wetlands restoration components, but it's also mixed in with some of this upland and prairie habitat. So I'm just going to keep it short, but we thought that might be a good a good topic to focus on as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I'm sorry, Adam Galber, I think I skipped over your name in the introductions, but you're up next, Adam. So Adam's from the Department of Interior.
No, you caught it. Good morning, everyone. Adam Gelber here, the Director of the Office of Everglades Restoration Initiatives. Like Melody had said and others before, appreciate your time and focused on this massive project. Great conversation with all the partners here. It's great to see everybody here on a Monday morning. I'm going to be brief. Maybe some ideas, just 2, maybe 3. How are we doing with a report card on governance with regards to restoration? How are we doing in that area of implementing WRDA 2000 and other aspects associated with the governance of restoration? And maybe some reminders there, and bringing that back up as we begin to move and go through a transitional period here. The other topic was, it's been 2 decades, probably maybe less, since we did, and this maybe goes along with what Ms. Leeds was speaking towards, is real estate. We have identified a lot of issues over the time of being the source of our problems or out there in the rhetoric. We have a people problem and how we manage that going forward. And if there could be some investigations into this and how we manage that going forward to ensure success. I think there's a myriad of other topics to request, and you've heard a lot here. And whether or not the committee and the partners here, it makes sense to do it, is to look at that science funding of a science-driven program. How are we doing there? And, you know, and again, I'd like to also kind of reflect a little bit back on what Tim had said on my notes here at the beginning is the mission statement. And where we live here and that driver, and where you have a lot here on the DOI agency heavy. I'm just another layer on that. So our focus is on those federal aspects, and you know, just maybe a report card on that would be interesting. That's all. Thank you.
Oh, so thanks, Adam. Let's move to Tabitha Elkington, please.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Tabitha Elkington. I'm a strategic program manager for the South Florida Ecosystem Restoration Program with the Corps of Engineers Jacksonville District. Appreciate the opportunity to be part of this discussion and appreciate your forthcoming work that we all, you know, a lot of us have mentioned is really critical for our program, and we look forward to hearing your feedback. So some of these things will kind of echo some of the comments you've heard from other folks already. One of the first things that I want to start with is water storage, which has come up with a few, you know, a few people have mentioned that in their comments. As other folks have mentioned, we've got our second periodic CERP update, our second periodic update to the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Program underway, evaluating, are we meeting the goals and objectives of CERP, kind of where are we at today? And we know, like, as we've been kind of developing that and as we've seen things kind of play out in other projects, the things have changed since what we originally envisioned in the Yellow Book. So, for example, looking at BBC, we've had issues with storage features that we envisioned there, particularly in the rock mine area. That area did not work as envisioned to hold and store water. You know, as we look at implementation of ASR, we know that's not going to work in as many places as we initially envisioned due to kind of geologic conditions, different places. So we had storage that was envisioned that's now no longer feasible as we've kind of gotten into that stage of looking at these things in a more detailed manner. So I think kind of similar to what some of the things Melody mentioned, or are there some other recommendations for how we get additional storage in the system? What are potentially new novel ways we could look at for water storage, especially recognizing that some of the initial storage we envisioned now isn't necessarily feasible. So that's kind of the first area, is just water storage broadly for the system. The second is kind of looking at, and this is also something that's come up from other folks too, is kind of looking at monitoring and both kind of project level monitoring and system level monitoring, and making sure we're doing an effective job reporting that to the public and thinking strategically about where we report that and then how we're using that information. So as Zulamet mentioned, we're working on our 2025 report to Congress, and we're trying to do a better job of starting to talk about project level benefits and incremental benefits. But we know we're only able to do that if we are able to kind of talk about project level monitoring and making sure that's happening to the best extent it can, because we do a much better job talking about system level monitoring and recovery system status report, but we're just kind of at the very beginning of talking about project level monitoring and project level benefits. So as I mentioned, we are kind of trying to do that for the first time in the report to Congress, but would appreciate where, recommendations for where it's most useful to report out on that kind of project level monitoring and results. Maybe that's within our project updates at the task force meeting, or, kind of where the best venues to talk about those results, I think would be helpful for us to think about. And then I also kind of think about how we have that project level and system level monitoring, and how, like, kind of creating the right feedback loop from how that informs adaptive management and our operational planning and modeling, and making sure there's a good feedback loop between that ongoing monitoring and assessment, both at the project level and system level, and then how that informs our adaptive management and our operational planning, and make sure we're kind of using that information. We are a science-based program. Making sure that kind of feedback loop is there and strong and in place, I think, is important. And I think it's also really interesting to just think about the stage we're at in the program, that we really are maturing. We now have some of our first projects that are complete or operating or nearing completion and starting to operating. We have so much under construction that will be needing operational plans and starting to operate. And we try and sequence our operational planning, so as soon as project features are complete, we can start to operate them and hopefully achieve some incremental benefits as each piece of the project is complete. And then having, a broader suite of ecosystem benefits as the full project operates or gets better integrated into system-wide operations. But that's going to be a big transition for our program, of moving into having a lot more operational planning and then starting to operate those projects and having multiple pieces start to work together. So the more we can think about how best to maximize ecosystem benefits as we add each piece operationally, I think it's going to be an exciting time for our program to have more and more pieces starting to operate. Because I think, as we showed in the system status report, there are parts of the system that are still really not in great shape, and those things are only going to improve as we start to operate these projects. So really a big transition, going from mostly planning projects to now being kind of at the height of construction to, all of a sudden we're going to have a ton of construction going on and increasing amounts of operational planning. So that's just kind of a big shift from where we are, big picture perspective in the program. Then the last piece are just kind of around themes of, and this has come up too, of kind of restoration versus preservation. We know we can't just preserve what was in place before, because the world continues to change around us with increased pressure from climate change and sea level rise and invasive species. So knowing that we want to do our best to kind of have healthier systems that react better to change, to best kind of preserve and restore ecological function and integrity. But we know we have these constant changing pressures impacting our ability to do that. I think some of that will be informed by the second periodic CERP update and helping us assess where we are with those changes. But we do, having to think about how we react and respond and prioritize to those different external pressures, and how that means we may change or adapt our view of what restoration success looks like. So I think those were kind of the big picture things I wanted to cover, and just appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, Tabitha. Carlos Coronado Molina, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'm Carlos. I'm working here at the district on the Everglades assessment section. And I want to address 3 different topics here. One of them is CERP North. As you know, CERP North is one of the CERP projects where we're gonna backfill the Miami Canal. And as part of those activities, also we are as planning to construct vegetation hammocks. Vegetation hammocks, that's the word that we are using instead of tree islands. But that's the function of those vegetation hammocks will be similar to a tree island. So what we are planning to do over the next year is to design and construct those vegetation hammocks. So we will be very interested from the CERP panel to get feedback from you, everybody from you, once we have a very good idea of the design and the construction of those vegetation hammocks. One of the biggest questions that we have is where exactly we are going to build those vegetation hammocks. We already have a very good understanding what kind of plants we want to plant on those vegetation hammocks, more or less how will be the constructions of the vegetation hammocks. But still, we have questions of where along the Miami Canal we need to build those vegetation hammocks. What is very important to know where we want to build the vegetation hammocks, because it's gonna affect how the water is gonna flow from the northwest to the southeast part of the system. So the construction and design of those hammocks will be very important to get a feedback from the panel to understand better where we want to build those futures. The other point that we are very interested to hear from the CERP panel is associated to something that already Melody Naja described, which is DPM and CEP South. The CEP South team have a really good monitoring program, and with the objective to assess the effects of flow into the system. So it will be very important to get a good feedback from the panel as the CEP South staff start producing the newest information of the monitoring program that they have in place. Over the next 2 years, they're gonna have a much better understanding the importance of flow on ridges and slough and tree islands and wildlife and fish in the system. And then that new information will be very good to have a feedback from the panel. The last point that I'd really like to speak right now is the tree island performance measure. The tree island performance measure, we are working very close, or Recovery is working very close with us to develop the tree island performance measure. This is a performance measure that we've been trying to develop for many years. Finally, we are on a really good track to develop the tree island performance measure. With during the upcoming year meeting, we're going to present much more details of everything that we've been discussing, how we want to do the tree island performance measure. And one of the most important aspects of the tree island performance measure is that we are talking with all the people involved who are interested in this issue. The Miccosukee tribe is involved, the Seminole tribe is involved, the Everglades National Park is involved, but pretty much all the stakeholders and agencies who are interested in the development of this tree island performance measure are part of this work. So it will be very good to hear from the panel once we have a very good plan in place to hear back from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. Okay, Tim Breen now, thank you.
Hey, Tim Breen, Fish and Wildlife Service, Everglades program. Yeah, good comments. I took a lot of time in the last session, so maybe I'll try and be brief here. And part of me just wants to defer to Jennifer Leeds' comments. I thought those were really good and sort of interesting, looking at compatible ecosystem services for upland areas. And, interesting, we're talking about uplands in an Everglades restoration program, but it's a really good idea and good thought. But I guess I'll start off, my wife always tells me that I repeat myself, so I'm going to have to repeat myself in starting she'll be proud of me. So I'll start off by saying, again, if we get the water right, but the habitat and fish and wildlife species composition are not functioning, how successful have we really been at Everglades restoration? It's sort of a theme that keeps coming back in my mind. And it brings me to a couple, quotes from some different documents. I always like to go to quotes. So from the WRDA 2000, the overarching objective of the plan is the restoration, preservation, and protection of the South Florida ecosystem while providing for other water-related needs of the region, including flood protection and water supply. Another quote from the programmatic regulations, which I think were in like 2012, 2013. Improvements to fish and wildlife habitat, including those that benefit threatened and endangered species, are expected to occur as a result of the restoration of hydrologic conditions. This will promote the recovery of native flora and fauna, including threatened and endangered species. And so, again, I think in the future, and I'm not sure if maybe the committee has looked at this in the past, but it might be useful to take a more of a deep dive into where are we? Where are we with species and habitats? And I'm not naive to think that in such a complex system that there aren't going to be places where there are benefits and things do really well and thrive, and other places where that's not going to happen, and that's okay. I think we all understand that, we all accept that, but it would be useful to maybe spend some time looking at where are we with some of the species and some of the habitats that are important to the Everglades. Everglades snailkite, we've mentioned. White-tailed deer, they're part of the system as well. Small mammals, we know there's issues with small mammals and pythons, and what's the current status? Wading birds, Florida panthers, of course. Fish, there's various fish species, a lot of invasive and exotic fish that are affecting the system. Okeechobee gourd, federally listed plant that we're working very closely with the Mixsuki tribe and their folks and doing some restoration work on tree islands in the water conservation area. And so that's a good partnership. And what's the status of the gourd in those areas, and how are we doing with them? And then invasive and exotic species in general. What's the status? Again, maybe a little bit more of a deep dive. And are there opportunities to protect species and habitat right now that maybe we're not aware of? I guess I think about, in 5 or 10 years, are we going to look back and have lost habitat, or species, or, and say, gosh, we could have done it a little bit differently and protected those habitats and those species. We don't want to do that, I don't think. And so I think we've got a great partnership among all the agencies and even with the private entities. And I think there's some good stuff that can be done here. So I think all I'm saying is it would be good to take a deep dive into looking at species and habitats and where we are. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Laura Brant's next from Recover.
Hey, yeah, thanks everybody. I'm here. I'm Laura Brandt. I'm the Recover Executive Committee. Have two basic things, or two basic topics. One of them is you should all be aware that we did our 2024 system status report this last year. We really made a big effort to change the way we did it to make it more useful, a better communication mechanism, really link some of the things that are happening on the ground with the system-wide perspective. And so it would be really helpful for us if the committee could take a look at that and help us understand where we hit the mark on what we wanted to do and maybe not so much. And if you don't have copies of that, it's available on the core Recover website, and we can certainly provide you whatever other details on that. The second topic is a broader topic. It has Recover applications, but it has applications for all of the aspects of this report. So the first committee was actually the CROG, let's see, the CROGI committee back in 2001. And in each of these reports, there have been recommendations that have been made. And there are some recommendations that seem to be made over and over again. And so the question is, what are those recommendations that keep recurring? And why is it that they keep recurring? Are there things that we could have been doing to have them get resolved? Or are there things that are reasons that are not within the scope of what we're talking about here, or some of the things on the timing of when projects get implemented? So it's basically taking a deeper dive into that. And so, for example, from that 2001 report, things like some of the specific restoration goals may be at odds with the general goals of ecosystem restoration, for example, managing water levels for particular endangered species. Restoration targets have not been reconciled with large-scale forces of change in South Florida, which came up today, especially population growth, land use change, and sea level rise. Targets and measures have not yet been defined for the broad goal of achieving compatibility of built and natural system, and there appear to be competing visions of what success actually means. So this is from 2001. And so as you're looking through the different things and the different conversations, there's pieces of this that have been addressed, but definitely pieces that have not. The 2007 report, which was the first CERP report, natural system restoration will be best served by moving the system as quickly as possible towards physical, chemical, and biological conditions that previously molded and maintained the historical Everglades. Have we done that? Have we done everything we could to make that happen? Although progress has been made in planning, coordination, and program management functions required to implement the CERP, there have been significant delays in the expected completion dates of several construction projects that contribute to natural system restoration. A significant challenge for the CERP is to implement the plan in a timely fashion while maintaining the federal and state partnerships and the coalition of CERP stakeholders. And so these are I just picked two reports. I picked the 2001 report and the 2007 report. And yet when you're having the conversation now, some of these things are still coming up. And so again, is why are they still coming up? Are there things that we can do to move forward on them better? Or are they things that we're not going to address in this particular venue, and there needs to be another venue to address them? So for example, Zulamet brought up the authorities issue, which is a real issue. And so if some of these things fall under the category of authority issues, we need to recognize that. And then we need to collectively, within the context of Everglades restoration, not so much in the context of CERP, but in Everglades restoration, figure out who has the authority to do the things that we need to do. Because I'm concerned that here we are 26 years later, and there are things that are falling through the cracks because it's in nobody's individual authority. And so those are the kinds of things when, and again, like I said, this goes beyond some of the Recover stuff, though the Recovers looks at things system-wide. So this is kind of a system-wide issue, but may not be a CERP-specific issue. So that's it.
Thanks, Laura. And finally, we have either Cassandra Armstrong or Stuart Van Horn from the South Florida Water Management District.
Hi, this is Cassandra Armstrong. I'll be speaking on water quality questions. I'm the Applied Sciences Bureau Chief here at the Water Management District. And one of the concerns that we have is water quality as it flows through our system. So the district has invested a lot of time, money, and effort into improving water quality as it flows from the top of our system south. And we've done a great job with the creation of our STAs and loading reduction programs. And for the most part, we're getting really good water quality in it as it flows through the system down to the park. We're noticing that some of the assumptions of once we got the water quality right, that it would stay right, might not be true. As it goes from marsh to canal to marsh to canal, there has been changes. And some of those changes may be to the benefit of water quality and some not so much. And so one of the things that we're looking for is to help us figure out when we are getting water quality problems coming off of natural marshes, what is the source of that? What is the impact of that? And what is the solution to remedy it? And is the solution cost effective? So, for example, if we are getting an increase in phosphorus of 1 ppb coming off of a natural marsh going into a canal, is it worth the effort to try to remedy that? Or do we live with it? And if so, what are the implications of living with it? So we are also looking at our canals and how they're conveying the water and doing retrofits for those our structures where we're seeing some issues like dredging canals and things of that nature. So looking for potential solutions for us to help us improve the water quality that we are delivering down to the southern part of our system, to the park especially. So and that's the only question for recommendations that I have.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for all of that, those really useful ideas and directions and recommendations for us. I would like to open it up for questions from the committee. And I see a couple of hands, and we'll start with Denise Reed.
Hi, thanks. Yes, thank you for all your comments. This is really just something that I might have missed. What is the timing of the CERP update in terms of the information that would be available to the committee?
So I'm Amanda Kahn. I'm the project manager for the SPCU at the Water Management District. We are looking to potentially have the complete modeling finished this autumn, after which the results will be handed over to the Recover team. They will perform the technical evaluation, and I'm not going to guess at the timeline that Gina has planned for that. I'll let her plan for that. But yes, so the end of this calendar year, we will have results. That's where we are right now. As y'all know, things change and thankfully things get authorized. So that means we incorporate additional items into our modeling. And so that takes time to make sure things are right in order to get to the valuation.
Totally understand that. So is it likely that we will have the technical evaluation in time for us to think about it during this cycle?
Gina?
Hi, all. I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So if the modeling is provided in the November timeframe, we should have the evaluation results for you all. I want to say in mid-March. I want to allow time for the holidays. So if all goes according to plan, hopefully we'll have something for you mid-March. I think your pencils are down in June or July, so you should have a little bit of time.
Is the technical I'm sorry to just keep going here, Helen, but is the technical evaluation the last step in the process? Or is there some kind of higher level? What are the consequences of this technical evaluation step?
So Sure. So the technical evaluation will be provided to the second periodic CERP update project delivery team, the one that's currently doing the modeling. And then a final report will be available probably a month or two after that for everything to, be completed, but Recover will, and you may want to partake in some of our workshops that Recover is going to do, where we will present, we will have the second periodic CERP update modeling team present the results to everybody. And then Recover has various breakout groups where we will go ahead and do an initial evaluation of the results. I'm more than happy to share the Recover work plan that has all of the different performance measures that will be reviewed, all of the modeling tools. So you can sit in on that and write about it.
Okay, I think it's,
Okay.
I'm just trying to work out if we're going to get the bottom line in time for us to write about the bottom line, or whether you'll still kind of, it will not be clear what the, you know, what the update is saying. Anyway, thanks very much, Ellen. Sorry,
Yep,
me to take
sure.
time. Thanks, Gina.
So
Thanks.
can I just follow up on that question by asking if, so it sounds like you'll have periodic project delivery team meetings that will be public. So just like BBC, or there's a lot of planning happening that you can tap into and learn as it's developing, even though the final PIR is not done. Similarly, for the periodic CERP update, will there be things that will be publicly available before the March 2026 timeline?
So we will be we are on the agenda to give an overview of where we are at the Science Coordination Group Working Group of the Ecosystem Task Force. And that's in April 19th, May 19th, sorry. But that's a public meeting in which we'll be presenting that, as well as likely on down the road. And like you said, there's going to be additional workshops or convening, and also we will make sure that we continue to roll out information and likely use that working group, science coordination group, as that forum to stay on the agenda.
Thanks, everyone. Alan?
Thanks, Helen. This one is for Jennifer Leeds, and it's much more definitive, so hopefully it'll be much quicker to answer. Regarding the IRL South project, I'm curious, one, is that all north of C44? The second question is, do you know how much of that is public versus private land? And third, are you also looking for ecosystem like valuation as part of this, or just simply trying to figure out what services have the greatest multiple benefit?
Hey, Al, thanks for the question. So I think the first question you asked, is it north of C44? So if you're referring to the C44 canal, the St. Lucie River, yeah, so that's a part of it, and it goes all the way up to the C25 up in St. Lucie County, right? And so, in all honesty, it's also a race against development. Martin and St. Lucie County right now are being developed probably 10 times faster than almost anywhere else in Florida. So trying to, protect those lands and also, look at the restoration benefit and how we can, make them compatible with ecosystem services. And yes, it is more of a valuation standpoint. As far as what is in public and private, so for the natural lands component, right now it's roughly half and half. So we do have a ways to go with still acquiring some private lands, and we're always open to working with willing sellers in that area as well.
Understood. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Chad?
Thanks, Helen. So a question from the new guy in the cheap seats. Is the South Florida Ecosystem Restoration Task Force the decision-making body for CERP?
I'll take this one as a lead in here, as others here have a lot of experience with that. Chad, is it a decision-making body? I would say not necessarily a decision-making body as much as a recommendation from testimony and other information provided and worked on by the working group and science coordination group. It's not a binding, authoritative task force. So it's basically making a recommendation to the Corps of Engineers and to the South Florida Water Management District on directions to go from a policy standpoint. Does that answer your question? No.
Well, it's, I guess my answer to that, Adam, and I appreciate that, is not yes or no.
Well, I want to be yes or no. I would like to have the clarity, because that's some of the times the challenges that we right, with not being clear in the response.
Some of this is going to be my understanding. Gina and others that know me know, this is the kind of stuff that I deal with all the time. And so this is not highly science technical. I'm trying to figure out the people to which all of this science and technical information is getting fed into and making decisions. And Adam, your answer may be that what you have now is which I'm familiar with on the Missouri River, is a high-level task force that receives information and probably in some way transmits recommendations. I guess what would it be? Is it only to the Corps? Is it jointly to the Corps and South Florida Water Management District? I'm just trying to figure out, is there a person or a set of people who are making overall decisions? I'm trying to figure out the breadcrumb trail of decisions, accountability, the societal collaboration that is adaptive management. Like, where does all this stuff feed into? Maybe it's just more diffuse. And
I'm going to take a minute here in a minute. I'm turning this over to Laura. So to me, in my view of being here for 6 years, and probably the first 2 or 3 was getting my feet wet. It takes a lifetime, right? Is understanding this specific capacity, right? And so it's a recommendation of the body that this is reported to. And the challenge is getting to take those issues on that are really challenging at the task force level, that are really extremely unclear, and getting a topic that is controversial to them to actually make decisions on. And a lot of times, by the time it bubbles up to them, some of the agencies have addressed that issue at the working group or SCG in that time span between the meetings. So that's kind of goes back to that question of the governance, is how are we doing in there, and how is the task force doing and taking on some of these more challenging, oily topics, and that I would like to see that happen more. I'd like to see some more direction coming out of the task force, but I asked it in an open-ended question for you all to do your walkabout in how we address this. So, because there are some things that needs to be worked on, maybe a little bit more closely at that level, at that policy level, to work these out and collaborate across that leadership role. So, Laura, please, I look forward to your diving in here, and go ahead.
Yeah, that was helpful, Adam. I appreciate it. Thanks. Sorry, Laura.
So yeah, to directly answer your question, Chad, the answer is no. The task force is not the decision maker for CERP, and the Corps and the district are the implementing agencies for CERP. And CERP is not all of restoration and is not everything that the task force looks over. And so it is very complicated. And in general, the decision makers are within the agencies and make decisions relative to the agencies, but there is not a clear decision body that makes decisions for overall Everglades restoration.
I would agree 100% with that.
Thank you. Denise, did you have a question?
I do, and it kind of goes along with that. With the SPCU, is there any companion effort to actually look at whether the governance structure and process of how things happen is in alignment with whatever the SPCU finds? Is there a companion effort?
Not that I'm aware of.
I think maybe you could help us understand the question, like, why do you think there isn't, that we think it's kind of inherent?
Well, it could be. I mean, and the question is just in the Chesapeake Bay, for example, we are going through a big revision process of the watershed agreement. And not only is that a big revision of the goals and outcomes and what everybody signs on to, but then there's also a companion effort to see what sort of governance structure and processes would need to be changed to fulfill that new revised watershed agreement. So is the existing structure doing the job? Are the way decisions kind of proceed through the system the right way to get the job done, or does that need revision as well? And so they're certainly interrelated, but they're treated separately. And so I'm just asking, to what extent in the process of doing the SPCU, do you kind of look at those processes to say if anything needs changed or tweaked?
Yeah, so I think that's really helpful to understand where you're coming from on that. So I think that's really important. I would say, from my perspective, I think it's a little premature in this program. I think we're still trying to implement the original projects, right? That timeline got protracted a bit because of the level of funding required to do all of these projects that were originally conceived as part of the plan. And I'd say we're probably maybe 10 years away from being able to really address that question, because I think we have to get these projects that were in this massive construction phase right now into operation, so that we can really see, are we achieving the benefits that we expected with the operations of these projects? And I'm not sure we're quite at the point to be able to decide if it's working or not. And so I think from our perspective, if we try to change up too much while we're building the airplane, that it will slow down the really great progress that we've been making over the last 5 or 6 years.
So an example of a process, though, that you might is like the questions about how the IDS actually gets built, and whether there's some changes to who's involved when. Would that be something that would be helpful now, as like a small step in governance and process?
I think something like that might be relevant, but something like, let's take a look at whether the CERP framework is right or not, or crack open that agreement. I think that would be counterproductive to where we are in the program at the moment. That's just my thoughts.
Oh, thank you.
So Gina and Tabitha, I saw your hands up earlier. Did you want to weigh in on this topic?
Sure. This is Gina. I just wanted to answer the question directly, in that the second periodic CERP update will not include a look at governance. The second periodic CERP update is a modeling exercise to understand whether CERP, as it was envisioned in the Yellow Book, or as it was changed from project authorization, is meeting the goals and objectives of CERP as laid out in that Yellow Book. So this is purely a modeling exercise to understand where we're attaining those goals, where we may have gaps. There could be some recommendations, but at this point in time, that is the only purpose of the second periodic CERP update.
And Tabitha, did you want to weigh in?
Sure. Yeah, I think I was going to kind of provide us, mention that it does not include the governance recommendations, but like it will be a reflection of our existing governance structure. And then I think kind of similar to the kind of other comments of like looking at the kind of big picture process piece is probably not super helpful, but thinking about smaller pieces of governance related to specific issues, like how we like the kind of the feedback loop I mentioned of how are we looking at monitoring and feeding that into adaptive management and planning for operations and our modeling and making sure there's a good flow of that information to develop and inform those processes. Something like that, or something like the IDS, I think is the scale of which we could look at that. It would be helpful to get recommendations around governance. And then I'll also just add, I'm happy to provide additional information on how we put the IDS together, since I help lead that effort along with Mindy Parrott at South Florida Water Management District, can kind of talk about the intent or the purposes of that document, where that requirement came from, and kind of the existing process for how we put that together at a future time, but wanted to throw that out there that I'm happy to help provide some of that background as well.
Thank you. So I guess this will have to be the last comment because we're a little over time. So Adam, did you want to say something?
Yeah, real quick. This may be just some brief evidence of a need to look at this governance and the statutory requirements of Section 601 of WRDA 2000, right? And how we interact on these topics and when we step in and we have these conversations, and how we act as and how we coordinate on this stuff early and often. So hopefully this might be one that find interesting and useful amongst all the partners here. So we're not like, we're out in front of things, right? And that we're not coming in after the fact with additional or different perspective on how these manage. So in order to look at, do we look at the periodic CERP update now, or do we have to wait till they're done working to make changes, right? So anyhow, just thank you for your time on this one.
Well, thanks everyone. So thanks to everybody who commented, made recommendations for us, gave us feedback on the report across these last couple of hours, and chimed in on answers to our questions. We're going to take a break now until 12:30 your time, 9:30 my time. So that'll be about 25 minutes. And we'll see you back here. All right. Thanks, everyone. Hi, everyone. I see people coming back. I'm going to assume if you don't have your camera on, you're still sitting there listening, because we are at 12:30 right now. So welcome back, everyone. I just want to check, is Kevin Cuniff here? You put a little thumbs up.
Yes, good afternoon. It's Kevin Kniff, Helen Reagan.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. So we're pleased to hear now from the Miccosukee Tribe of Indians. Kevin Kniff is the Chief Sustainability Officer for the Miccosukee Tribe, and I'm going to hand it over to you. And we have our next session starts at 1, so you've got a good chunk of time.
And thank you. And Helen, just to, for my knowledge, is Stacy Myers participating, or is it just me here today from the Seminole Tribe?
It's just you today.
Okay. Well then, I'm not normally one who is short-winded, so I guess this is good. And I want to say good afternoon to everybody here on the CERP panel. My name is Kevin Kniff. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer for the Miccosukee Tribe of Indians of Florida. I'd like to extend you a warm welcome and a deep appreciation on behalf of the tribe for the commitments that you have now made, particularly for new members. You will come to learn this role explicitly over the coming time. And for the returning members, again, even more of an appreciation of your continued commitment to want to serve in this capacity to help inform and make recommendations on where Everglades restoration can see better outcomes, better planning, better results overall for all of its intended purposes. Very quickly, just for those who might be new to South Florida or to CERP in general, or even to the Miccosukee Tribe of Indians of Florida. The tribe has helped to shape the very landscape of the Everglades since the time that the Everglades began to take its current shape, about 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. Miccosukee ancestors lived on the Florida Peninsula, and over the course of the thousands of years, as the Everglades was beginning to change and become more of the wetland that we see it today, the tribe was instrumental in helping to shape some of the key attributes of the landscape, most notably the tree islands that constitute the Central Everglades. And I will note that 70% of tree islands have been lost in the last several decades since we have seen changes in the landscape as a result of the Central and South Florida Drainage Project, and then more recently in the decades with some of the water management that has occurred that has seen unusually and unnaturally high water levels throughout the Central Everglades. The tribe also helped to shape this landscape by building elevation on these little outcrops of rock and organic matter in the landscape to help create the elevation that the tree islands inhabited, and for which the community of vegetation took its roots quite literally. This also was supplemented then by the system creating a situation of helping these tree islands to maintain themselves and accrete by moving sediments through the system that the tree islands would capture, and the plants would help to store and incorporate into the overall footprint of that particular tree island. These are the traditional and cultural areas that the tribe has inhabited in the time that they were using South Florida as a hunting and gathering and trading place, and for which were the key outposts that the tribe was able to survive during the United States military efforts in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, where the Seminole Wars, as they're called, were attempts to remove Indians from the Florida landscape. The tree islands were that last bastion where the tribe retreated to and survived, only because the Civil War started in 1865. And that took away the military focus out of South Florida and back up to other to the Civil War. From here, it is where the tribe regrouped, continued to ensure that its culture and traditions were being protected and practiced, where its language was being protected and spoken and taught, and from which the tribe sprung forward again into the present. The Tree Islands and the Everglades are the heart and soul of the Miccosukee people. Tribal members are laid to rest out on Tree Islands, and their DNA then goes back into the Everglades, through the water, into the trees that used to grow up where tribal members were laid to rest. They are sacred places. They are the places where families were raised. They are places where the wildlife and the plants that the tribe has depended upon take their safe haven in this aqueous landscape of the Everglades. I only make that as a precursor for you all to understand the importance of where the Miccosukee tribe seeks to engage today within this particular forum with you all as CERP, as well as the many fora that the tribe is now engaged in. And it's only within the last few years that the tribe has made the decision to make a change in the policy in the way that it wants to engage publicly. The tribe has seen degradation of the Everglades in a way that many probably don't understand or can really document because of the baselines that we use for assessing the system status, which goes back 30 years of direct on-site observations for restoration assessment efforts, and certainly through the modeling efforts that have been done. But again, modeling is a place where we use to have conversations. They're not necessarily reconstructing or predictors of what the Everglades was, and certainly not what it could or should expect to be completely, as we rely on them as important tools right now to help inform us, but they are not to recreate the natural system. Okay. All that being said, the Miccosukee tribe now wants to share its knowledge, and it wants to be actively engaged and to assume its role as a leader in Everglades restoration, and in a way to help inform a process by which it is seen is not necessarily going according to what the tribe might like to see. And that leads me to bring some comments here on the last CERP biennial report. The tribe was extremely appreciative of the effort that the previous panel invested to get to know the tribe, to get to know the tribe's interests, and to get to understand better where the tribe's perspectives are in the Everglades restoration and management landscape. And specifically, the tribe is very appreciative that the panel took up as a matter of importance how ITech should be utilized and incorporated better within the Everglades planning, assessment, and targets to help lay that foundation for informed decision-making. The Miccosukee tribe has worked very hard over the last couple of years to take the various memoranda that were published by the Biden White House administration in order to try and lay out the context and, I guess, the rules for how to adequately do this in a way that ITech can be utilized for helping to inform federal decision-making in general. And of course, with the Army Corps of Engineers being the federal sponsor, that is where ITech has its place in Everglades restoration. The Miccosukee tribe, when internal within the tribe, discussed, brought forward a method that sought to actually adhere to the various information criteria standards that were postulated by the Biden administration, and incorporate that into a methodology of how to gather this information, to vet this information between the knowledge holders, and some of the technical science and legal team that the tribe hires to reach a consensus of how that knowledge is being shared through traditional means can be synthesized with Western science and other data and information, and therefore packaged in a way that the knowledge holders and the staff who serve the tribe can bridge that gap of taking what I would consider, one of the comments made by earlier through the National Park Service was taking an oral history in order to make that into an appreciable science effort. I put forward here that it is much more than just an oral history. This is lived experience and knowledge that has been passed down through millennia of tribal members who have lived in this landscape, who have shaped this landscape, and not for the purpose of an academic pursuit or for research or for state agency management. It was a matter of life and death. And so therefore, the knowledge and the understanding of the system that the Miccosukee people have been passing down to the generations is absolutely essential, in my opinion, and in the tribe's interests, to put forward here so that it's not just oral history. It's not just a story of one person. These are the shared knowledge bases of a traditional Native American tribe. And that information about how the system has functioned, the variability surrounding this system, the needs of the system, and maybe some of the ways that we are overthinking some of the components of how to replumb this system are absolutely essential and at a level of parity in terms of their value with everything that Western science has been offering in this space over the span of 25 to 30 years, specific to CERP and pre-CERP activities. And so this is where the tribe came to publish its methodology in the Miami Law Review back in 2024, and for which the tribe has since then published 2 statements of ITEC that are related to essentially water levels in the Central Everglades and how different they are now and impactful as they have been as a result of water management, as a result of manipulation of the water system in favor of some of the Endangered Species Act concerns that we talked a little bit about earlier, and the legacy of that impact on the system, and quite literally, the culture of the tribe. The notion that the Everglades always needs to be inundated and treated like a pond as opposed to a flowing river of water through a system that dries down in the dry season and charges up in the wet season is still a notion that seems to be a matter of difference when it comes to Everglades restoration. That is very challenged right now with taking 50% less of the land available for Everglades to disperse and hold and move water to the coasts. We haven't lost 50% of the rainfall over that same time frame. And so Everglades restoration is every bit as much of an exercise of environmental restoration for its purposes to create the ecological conditions and the services that the Everglades can provide and for which have in large part been lost in many ways. But we also need to deal with that balance of 50% of water that has to go somewhere, because there's 11 million people that depend on that flood management to live in this landscape. So tremendous challenges to be sure. But the tribe is very appreciative that CERP would seek to raise up its voice and bring forward the recommendation that ITEC moving forward needs to be an important component of the conversations and the action that will surround Everglades restoration, planning, and management going forward. I'd like to touch on a quick comment, since we're talking about ITEC, that was raised by the Water Management District. And it is true that there are different responsibilities that state or federal agencies have, and I'm speaking specifically to the Miccosukee tribe. The tribe enjoys the sovereign-to-sovereign relationship with the federal government and its agencies, but has a different relationship with the Water Management District. I would note that I feel that the tribe feels that there is a very strong relationship with the Water Management District, a collaborative and a partnering relationship with the Water Management District. And we want to ensure that we continue to have that type of a relationship. But it is ultimately the federal government and therefore the Corps of Engineers who has the express responsibility in trust to the Miccosukee tribe to ensure that ITEC is being incorporated and utilized at in the manner that it is intended by the Miccosukee tribe, which is to bring a synthetic message and knowledge that is equal parts tribal knowledge and equal parts Western science, in order to help inform the incredible science that has been conducted here and is continuing to be conducted, not only by the Recover Group and associated partners, but by, for example, the Florida Coastal Everglades long-term ecological monitoring that is being done through Florida International University, and through which the tribe would like to see better incorporated into CERP. As a matter of common sense, logical information sharing. For you all who are charged now with understanding where you're going to be making these recommendations, the tribe would absolutely put forward for your consideration that being better inclusive and synthetic of the science that is being done outside of the actual federal funded Recover and or Water Management District research is really an important way that we can fill some knowledge gaps or to leverage resources that can act as a force multiplier to better fill knowledge gaps, either through monitoring or directly through experimentation, both of which are necessary in order to better understand and forecast status and trends of the Everglades with all of the different construction projects and in their various components and the timing for which they're going to be coming online, not to mention the very complicated water control planning efforts that will be along that way. So getting more folks involved is probably going to be a positive step forward than trying to continue to operate in different lanes for different purposes. I'd like to put forward here for the panel's knowledge and understanding, and particularly for the new folks, that the tribe takes a very holistic approach to how it views Everglades restoration should proceed. There is the need to reconnect the headwaters of the Everglades in the Kissimmee River and up north of Orlando, through the floodplains of the river, down through Lake Okeechobee, into the Central Everglades and Big Cypress, and down to the coastlines. That includes Florida Bay, that includes Biscayne Bay, that includes the Southwest 10,000 Islands, and the areas basically from south of the Caloosahatchee and including south of the St. Lucie River estuaries. These are the agreed upon footprints of what the historic Everglades was, and this is the footprint by which we have to operate and consider now for restoration and management. There has been tremendous strides moved forward on how to address water flowing, particularly on the eastern side of the Central Everglades through the Shark River Slough into Everglades National Park. We've seen Tamiami Trail bridged. That work continues. We've seen the appropriation for the Everglades Agricultural Area Reservoir, an unnatural feature on the landscape, but perhaps a necessary one, again, to deal with the balance of water that I described earlier that has a challenge on where to put it, to be better utilizing for the future in order to send water through the system, flow that water through the system in an appropriate water level and with the appropriate timing seasonally. We are very challenged right now in the way that we can flow water through the system, and that very much dictates how water control plans are done. And it very much impacts the actual natural cycle of how water charges up in the system and then dries down in the dry season. We are seeing very drastic changes to this as a result of an inability to more effectively move water across Tamiami Trail. We see water that stacks up north of the trail into Miccosukee Conservation Area 3A. That greatly has affected Tree Islands, as I noted before, and is essentially leading to many extirpations of important species, including those that are threatened and endangered federally and statewide, and for which traditionally the tribe can no longer find in its landscape as a result of too much water in this system. Everglades National Park, south of the trail, is too dry and is looking for more water. But Everglades restoration is more than Shark River Slough. It is more than trying to reconnect Miccosukee Conservation Area 3A with 3B for the purpose of sending water into Shark River Slough. There is the entirety of the system that is bisected by Tamiami Trail, and it is the entirety of this system that was responsible for moving water south across it. I'd urge that the CERP panel keep in mind the very important need to continue a focus on the western side of the system. I'm very happy that the Western Everglades Restoration Project was authorized in WRDA 2024, and as a result is going to need to have focus, attention, and resources dedicated toward getting this cornerstone project of Everglades restoration on its way moving forward. The Water Management District has picked up the torch first and is starting to do some installation of important culverts on the south side of the project footprint, adjacent to the Tamiami Trail on the L28 South Interceptor levee. This will be an important reconnection of the southwestern portion of the Central Everglades and the eastern portion of Big Cypress to allow water to move across this important place. But we still need to ensure that that water can get across Tamiami Trail into the Lostman Slough, which is the second largest slough system within the greater Everglades system, and for which is currently very much impacted and shunted off of water, having been cut off by the Tamiami Trail and the inability to put water through the Western Everglades structures on Tamiami Trail as a result of ESA concerns for a species that does not exist in this space on land that is not designated as critical habitat. I'm going to hold on that. This is not what we're here to really discuss today. The holistic vision of Everglades restoration of the tribe puts forward is very simple and logical. It is decompartmentalizing the system and allowing water to flow when that water is come upon the landscape by rainfall, and to allow the historic manner in which Lake Okeechobee overflowed its banks to supplement that water down through the Everglades in the dry season. To be sure, the Everglades does need to dry down. Some years are going to be wetter, and we'll see less of that. Some years, like this year, for example, is much drier in the dry season, and that Everglades will dry down as a result. These species that live within this landscape depend on this variability. Everglades restoration should not be an effort to try and create a static notion of what the Everglades water levels should be from wet season to dry season, year to year, decade to decade. It is not always meant to have water in the system. The Miccosukee tribe moved by foot and by ox cart through the Central Everglades many dry seasons. Not everyone, but many of them. We haven't seen that in decades. We're starting to see a little bit more of it here this year, and that's just a matter of Mother Nature. Variability and flexibility in the operations to allow for this variability are absolutely required, and things that are, I will admit, are difficult for agencies to grapple with, who have a particular charge, and with the Corps of Engineers, who are charged to build a project in the way that it was authorized and funded by taxpayers. The last thing that I'll put forward before my time is up is that we focus a lot on water quality, and for right reason. The Miccosukee tribe has established a phosphorus standard criteria of 10 parts per billion, which is a science-based number on the Alligator Alley Reservation in the heart of the Central Everglades, and is a reason that has been a lot of constraint for project implementation and for flowing water as a result of poor water quality. It is the Water Management District's responsibility, as stated by the Corps, to deal with water quality in Everglades restoration. It is not expressly a federal responsibility. The tribe argues that while water quality is extremely important and has been the key harbinger of the need to address water quality, what we also need to address is flowing water through the system at higher volumes, not necessarily higher depths of water through the system, but at higher volumes, which means sending more water in the dry season in particular, and relieving the constraints to that water flow across the system. This will do more to help heal the Everglades than any of the balance of the individual projects. If we can get water across the trail and get it down to the coasts where it needs to go, this will help to realize the vision of Everglades restoration and allow for the land to heal. The tribe knows this better than anybody. The tribe has evolved with and changed with the Everglades, has seen many changes, many impacts, droughts, floods, and all the time takes it in stride because it is part and parcel of this type of wilderness. A system that is variable, that is wet, is dry, and everywhere in between. And that's what the system needs to be and can be today, and still support the user needs and flood control needs that are necessary for the balance of South Floridians living here. You have a very, very important job ahead of you. And what you say and what you write matters and is heard. So I suggest and please implore you to continue to use your voices, to be thinking critically, to be thinking outside of the box. The tribe invites the panel again to come and visit the tribe on its lands as many times as you like. Adam Gelber noted you all should take a walkabout and get to know the various corners of Everglades restoration, management, governance, etc. Come get to know the Miccosukee tribe a little bit more and to understand the perspectives that can help shape the good outcomes that are being sought by everybody on this phone call, as well as the many thousands of people who contribute and have contributed to Everglades science, management, and restoration over the decades. Thank you very much. I've got 2 minutes if there are any specific questions before we move on.
All right. Thanks very much, Kevin, for providing the Miccosukee tribe's perspective. I'll open it up to committee members. Do you have any follow-up questions? Yep, Denise.
Kevin, are there integrating knowledge types is a real challenge. Do you have some examples of how that's successfully done in this instance in the Everglades and Miccosukee held knowledge?
Thank you. It's a great question. It's basically the crux of how to incorporate ITEC. What does that result in actionable items? What we are doing right now is I don't have necessarily a discrete outcome to point to, but we have been able to incorporate this information, I think, most powerfully in the planning effort that is underway right now for the Central Everglades. We're calling this CERP 1.0, which will be the water control plan that changes the COP, or Combined Operations Plan, right now. We're trying to incorporate information about historic water levels throughout the Everglades that are more conducive for Tree Island health as being indicative of what they were in the past versus what they are being proposed to be as part of CERP 1.0. I'll also note, as a precursor to that, Indigenous tribal ecological knowledge has been essential to helping to shape out a deviation to the combined operations plan that is currently being considered now and vetted in a multi-agency effort because of the concerns that the tribe has raised in the way that COP as a management tool, having success that it has had, and I'll acknowledge, of getting more water across the trail, has not done enough to address the issues of flooding that the tribe experiences on the southwestern quadrant of the conservation area, where the western gates are closed on a calendar date basis now in protection for marginal marl prairie habitat to the south of Tamiami Trail that only exists as an artifact of the installation of the Tamiami Trail itself. And so those are two concrete examples that are in the works. We're also bringing forward the tribe's own science as being done by the Fish and Wildlife Department to help supplement the recommendations in the CERP 1.0 water control planning effort to show a model of how this can benefit the wider range of wildlife, some of which are being managed specifically for targets as per Everglades restoration, to show that you can basically have your cake and eat it too. I will be presenting this at the upcoming Greater Everglades Ecosystem Restoration Conference for any who might be able to attend.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. So we're going to move on to the next session now. So in this next session, we're going to hear from 3 important stakeholder groups in Everglades restoration on their perspectives on key issues for Everglades restoration progress. Mark Perry and Callie Cox are the co-chairs of the Everglades Coalition, an alliance of nearly 60 environmental organisations. Tom McVicker from McVicker Consulting is joining us to speak on behalf of agricultural and urban water users. And Ian Nakayama from the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership is joining us to represent perspectives of recreational users of the Everglades. And the prompts for this discussion, this panel, is why is Everglades restoration important from the perspective of Everglades NGOs and professional and recreational fishermen or urban and agricultural water interests? What are the key issues and challenges for Everglades restoration moving forward from your perspectives? And what issues are most in need of the committee's attention in its 2026 review? And we'll go in the order that I just introduced people. So we start with Mark Perry and Callie Cox from the Everglades Coalition. Thanks.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark Perry. I'm the Executive Director and CEO of Florida Oceanographic Society, which is a member organization of the Everglades Coalition, nearly 60 organizations such as Audubon and many, many others, national and state and local organizations that have come together for Everglades restoration. I'm joined with co-chair Kelly Cox from Florida Audubon. So we'll just kind of start through with a couple of introductory ideas. The perspective on Everglades Coalition was basically established by since 1986, when then Governor Bob Graham pulled together a group of about 140 or so folks on the southwest coast of Florida to come together as an Everglades coalition and really focus in on how we can restore this river of grass system throughout South Florida. And since then, we've held annual conferences year to year, and it provides for the largest forum for understanding Everglades and Everglades Forum. We'll go to the next slide. We have so the coalition, as I mentioned, is an alliance of nearly 60 organizations and covers all the greater Everglades ecosystem from Orlando all the way south to tip of Florida and the Florida Keys. The coalition's members are policy experts, attorneys, scientists, and planners throughout their organizations. And what really comes together and brings together is the fact that the organization is so diverse and has so many diverse organizations working in specific regions throughout the Everglades system. Next slide. So the kind of the annual forum, as I mentioned, is our annual conference, usually held around January of each year. We try to bring together, at that time was only about 140 or so, is now 430 or so plus of participants in this annual conference. It really helps to bring everybody together, not just the NGOs, but also the diverse community of our agencies who are involved, both federal and state, whether it's the Corps of Engineers, Department of Interior, and so forth, and also our state agencies and state legislatures. This year's conference was held down in the Miccosukee Resort down at the Tamiami Trail area. Wonderful venue, and brought together many people, as I said, to do us kind of a reflection on our progress and opportunities. Being in it now for over 40 years, we wanted to kind of reflect on those past achievements and what's been going on since 2000 when we signed the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, but also, reflecting forward as to what the next 4 decades would bring and contemplating where we could go from here. Next slide was, next slide, there we go. And here's kind of some highlights from the conference. We have each year, we recognize certain peoples into our Hall of Fame and also into recognizing major champions within the Everglades. What impresses me too in recent years is the involvement of the tribes, particularly, but also up in the upper right corner, you see the involvement of students. We have many students that attend who are sponsored through different organizations and the coalition, and to come and participate in the conference and really get their feet wet, so to say, to get involved with Everglades restoration on this kind of policy level and discussion level of the policy, the science, and everything that surrounds Everglades. And they really, really get a lot out of it. Next slide. So I'll turn it over to Kelly, and Kelly, you're going to hit on some of the restoration highlights and challenges we have moving forward.
Thank you, Mark. And thanks everybody for having me. We can go to the next slide. So for the Everglades Coalition, something that we're really focused on right now is full funding of Everglades restoration. And as you all know, with the federal transition that we're under right now, there are some challenges with that, looking into the future, what this might look like. We remain pretty optimistic that the final fiscal year 25 Army Corps work plan will include at least $425 million for Everglades restoration. And the fiscal year 26 funding cycle at the federal level is still ongoing and somewhat delayed due to the administration change. So many of our member organizations are working very hard at the federal level to try to reconcile that and to elevate the Everglades restoration priorities that we share at the federal level when we're looking at those funding priorities. On the state side of things, we're in the midst of legislative session, and Mark will share just in a moment about our Everglades Action Day. Our crew went up to Tallahassee last week to collectively advocate for a number of our legislative priorities, but one of those is full funding at the state level for Everglades restoration. So this is very detailed budget and is kind of the latest that we have as of last week coming out of the state legislature. But as you know, they are going to go into conference, the state house and Senate, to find a middle ground on Everglades restoration in terms of projects and funding for those projects. So the coalition is very focused on this and focused on full funding for Everglades restoration, understanding the need for continuity of this program to move forward both at the state and federal level. Next slide, please. And here are the coalition's legislative priorities. If you're not familiar with the Everglades Coalition, something that I'll share is that in our alliance of nearly 60 different organizations, something that makes us very unique is that we are a consensus-driven organization. So that means we have to have 100% agreement on any of our positions that we arrive at. So that means every single organization, when we are voting on items, holds a trump card. And so that means that we have to negotiate and we have to find common ground when we agree on things. And so this year for our legislative priorities, we agreed on these 5 priorities that we wanted to share both at the state and the federal level in advocating collectively for Everglades restoration and sort of ancillary issues that might affect Everglades restoration. So you'll see that number 1 priority, once again, is fully funding Everglades restoration. This is our top one that we're focused on. We need the funding to get the job done. So that's what our groups have agreed to collectively focus on. The second one is strengthening protection for all Florida waters. So really taking a broader look, as Kevin kind of mentioned, at the water quality piece of this. So our organizations are looking at the regulatory processes that might impact Everglades restoration and advocating for protection of water quality within the ecosystem. The third is reinstating robust land use planning to promote sustainable growth and utilizing funding for land conservation purchasing. So this is in particular, there are a few key opportunities within the greater Everglades ecosystem, including in the Everglades agricultural area and in Miami-Dade County to acquire conservation lands and also to take a more forward-looking approach at properties that we will need for Everglades restoration in the future. So for projects that are currently in the planning study phase, such as BBC, or how can we incorporate land use planning to ensure that local decisions do not undermine these larger federal and state investments when we're thinking about things like local planning and land use and zoning. Number 4 on our priority list is protecting our infrastructure from sea level rise and storm surge, and also just building in a way that's more resilient. So this is, again, keeping adaptive management in mind, and our organizations are just really concentrated on how can we make the entire system more resilient and long-standing. How can we ensure that what we're investing, both at the state and federal level, is something that will be there for a long time to come? Also recognizing that Everglades restoration is one of our primary defenses to the impacts of climate change. And finally, number 5 is safeguarding our state parks and conservation lands from development to preserve the Everglades ecosystem. I know this committee is very diverse and might not be as honed in on local issues, but our organizations were very focused on an attempt recently to develop out some of our state parks and build some facilities within state parks, such as pickleball courts and hotels and things like that. And we have really iconic state parks, such as Fakahatchee Strand State Park down in Southwest Florida, and others that are really critical pieces to the Everglades restoration puzzle. And so we want to ensure that those places are safeguarded and that we are preserving them as part of this broader vision of Everglades restoration. Next slide, please. All right, I'll turn it over to Mark to talk about Everglades Action Day.
Yeah, so each year we go up. Since 2012, the state legislature declared Everglades Day as Marjorie Stoneman Douglas's birthday, which was April 7th. So each year we use that to get up to the state legislature with both East Coast and West Coast folks from throughout South Florida. We get up there. We have probably about 40, 50 participants that we break out into 7 teams, and we have 60 or so meetings with all the state legislatures in different regions, as well as talking with their senior staff and members and attending committees that are in progress while we go up. This session this year was from April and May, so March and April. So we're into that session right in the middle on April 7th and 8th. We have, again, a lot of great participation, and I'm particularly hopeful for the many students that we have that go with us on this in this Everglades Action Day. Next slide, please. So in recent kind of coalition positions, and you can get a lot on the website at evergladescoalition.org and look at our position papers from past. This particular year, we did some resolutions to recognize and appreciation of Shannon Estenos, who is an outstanding champion for the Everglades and Everglades restoration from very, very beginning stages all the way through her stint as a deputy secretary at the U.S. Department of Interior. So we made recognition of that, but also letters that are important to direct to the district, South Florida Water Management District, regarding different proposed water projects within the Everglades agricultural area, and also conservation easements, and working, of course, letters to the governor to look at specific wildlife issues and things like that we've done this particular year. It's urgent that the coalition, as Kelly said, is consensus based, and so whenever we drive home a letter, it's based on our current positions and our values, and then moving that forward to our quarterly meetings, and then getting consensus to move forward. Next slide, please. So we have kind of just given you a really brief overburden, but I think Kelly topped it with the current issues that address us. I mean, obviously there are key issues and challenges, and one of the questions you had are what issues needed for the committee's attention in 2026 review of the comprehensive Everglades plan. So we're anxious to kind of move these kind of meetings forward and work with the committee on understanding what those issues are and trying to address those as they are challenges and moving forward in this day and age. So I appreciate the time to kind of share our aspects, and we're available for questions.
I'm good now, Stephanie and everyone. Thanks for all your comments in the chat. Thank you, Mark and Callie. If you didn't know what was going on, there was an earthquake alert where I was, and I had to drop and cover, which I've never had to do before in an earthquake. So that was all exciting. And now my dog is freaked out, so you might hear some barking in the background. So thank you for that. We're going to move on to Tom McVicker. We'll have questions at the end if there's time, but over to you, Tom.
All right. Thank you. My name is Tom McVicker. I'm a water resource engineer consultant, born and raised in South Florida, and for the last 45 years, I've been a consultant on strictly water resource issues, almost 100% in the Everglades watershed, mostly private sector, agriculture, rock mining, and various other things that people try and do down here. This is going to be a little different. Agriculture is not a big part of your mission, and we don't see you very often, or you don't see us very often. But CERP is absolutely critical to agriculture down here, and we participated very heavily in the development of CERP. So I want to give you a little bit of background. I've just got 6 or 7 slides. So I got to go through a lot of ground in that time. But I want to leave you with what ag is thinking now, what's bothering us, not bothering us, and you might be able to get from that something you might want to look at later. I don't know. I'll leave that up to you. Like I say, water supply has never been high on your agenda. So I'll talk about the stuff, re-study plan, lake ops. I have to talk about lake ops, and this figure here is a plot we update on our website every day. The blue line is the lake stage. The y-axis is the lake stage in feet of NGVD. Bottom axis horizontal is the calendar. And you can see the various zones reflect the EIS that was just done on the new lake schedule. But the message here is the lake stage is crawling like a rock. We're still kind of early in the dry season. This chart has the rapt attention of every grower, every farmer in South Florida, because Lake Okeechobee is the only thing they've got to fall back on to get their crop through the season. So it's real important. More on that later. Next slide, please. Now for a little history. This chart is dated 1998. It was part of what they call the Yellow Book, which was the plan approved by Congress. I don't think many people paid much attention to this chart. Growers certainly did. We had a meeting over in Henry County, which is west of Lake Okeechobee, southwest, at a place called the Hilliard Cabin. Terry Rice was the colonel, Stu Applebaum spoke for CERP, and we had probably 10 big landowners. And when they saw this slide, they said, heck no, we don't want anything to do with CERP, because you're taking our reliable water supply right now, which is Lake Okeechobee, and you're telling us in the future we're going to get half of that. And we're going to be dependent on these other colors in the bar for our water supply. And Stu immediately said, we're never going to take your water away until we know these other things are working. And they said, well, where is that written down? And it wasn't. And it eventually evolved into the project assurances in Order 2000 and something they called the savings clause. But the two important bars here are the left bar, which is condition at the time CERP was developed, and the right-hand bar, which is the plan approved by Congress. Water supply, maybe 30% of it was going to be derived from ASR. It took the Corps about 2 years to decide ASR won't work over there. This is a C-43 basin west of the lake, very important agricultural area. ASR won't work. The next thing was the green, which is the reservoir. We're just about complete with a big reservoir on the C-43 canal. Problem is, the reservoir is not built where CERP in 2000 said it would be. The Caloosahatchee is divided into east and west basins. All the ags in the east basin, the reservoir in the CERP model was in the east basin, so it supplied a lot of water to agriculture. The reservoir that's going to come online this summer is in the west basin, provides no water supply for agriculture. So what the farmers feared and the growers feared has come true, is all they've got left is a lake. Now, they haven't been reduced to this amount, but they are now stuck with the lake. Next slide, please. This is another history, but not as far back. Again, having to do with Lake Okeechobee. The Herbert Hoover Dike was in serious structural condition. The Corps had to take some emergency measures to fix the dike. One of the emergency measures was change the schedule of the lake, change the way the water level in the lake was managed. Important part of these three bars here, again, this is a different chart. You have the basin name on the bottom, EAA, and the other LOSA. C-43 is over here in this other LOSA. And up here you have the cutback percentage. That's the percentage of what the crop needs that they can't get with this plan. So the base condition was 13. That was on the previous chart. The original tentatively selected plan for the new schedule is in yellow. Very good. That's the base condition. All's good. Problem is, for the Corps to achieve that performance, the state had to completely change their water shortage management rule. And they would not and could not do that because of a number of issues. Number one, endangered species. So without changes to the water shortage plan, this is what the schedule is. The schedule predicted, we're now looking at cutback percentage 33% during drought years. That's obviously disaster for farmers. And that's what they're looking at this year, frankly, because this is turning out to be a draft year. So how did the Corps get around the savings clause, the project assurances? When they developed the plan originally, they were going to meet the savings clause. This yellow bar here meets the savings clause. Once the state said, no, we can't change the water shortage rule in this time frame, the Corps said, well, we're just going to redefine the lake schedule as something they call intervening non-CERP project. Nobody in the public was party to that decision. No one was allowed to comment on it. But that's what the Corps did, and that's kind of what the Corps does. And so now Lake Okeechobee is not part of the base condition. So this bar became the base condition for CERP. Next slide, please. All right, now we're up to 2024. We have a new lake schedule. Still have the same everything else. You can see the zones here, D1, D2, D3, those were the zones shown on the first chart I showed. Big changes with this new schedule. Flow south. As long as you're not in a water shortage, which is below this purple line, there'll be flow south if the Everglades wants it. Over here, cut downs in the discharges to the western estuary, depending on how high and how low the lake stage is. I drew a red line around this. This is a core chart, but I drew this red line, how it was modeled. This is everything the EIS saw. This is the plan that was analyzed in the EIS. Next slide, please. This is the plan the Corps actually put in the record of decision. This is now the official lake schedule. All the intermediate zones are gone. All the intermediate cutbacks over here are gone. And the schedule says up to 2,000 CFS to the west. That's the top end of the system. They can't sustain that without driving the lake stage into water shortage. By the way, when the lake goes into water shortage, there's an immediate cutback to ag users that depend on the lake. Usually it's 45%. It's a very draconian process once we get into water shortage. Now the Corps, they won't do this, I don't think. We haven't had this schedule very long, so they would kind of try and do what's in the EIS is my impression, and because they see the same thing we see. But we don't have any assurance of that. And when you're in agriculture, especially a lot of the big time ag we have down here, projecting risk is very important. You got super investment tied up in the crop and all the equipment associated with the crop. So be able to project the risk is important. You can't project the risk when you don't know how the system is going to be operated. And that's kind of a drawback. Next slide, please. Last one. I was alluding to the fact that the Corps wants to meet the lake performance they got in the EIS, not necessarily in the vague, unconstrained schedule. So they developed a tool to track how well they're doing that. They call this the lane assist tool. The blue line is the actual lake stage. The top line, which is kind of purplish pink on my screen, is where the lake stage would be if they were following the schedule that was in the EIS. And you can see they project 30 days ahead. So this is the projection for middle of May. Right now, they're more than a foot below where they would have been under the EIS for the current schedule. This spread's only going to get worse. And then I need to mention the lake's got serious problems with its own ecology, so they've taken special measures this year to draw the lake down further. So this is not a pure application of the schedule in the EIS. This, shall we say, corrective action or mitigative actions for the lake stage were never simulated. Now, getting back to how do you define the risk, it would have been nice if we'd had a simulation of this activity, just so we could know what we had to look forward to or what the percentage breakdown would be that we might be able to survive the next dry season. But we don't have that. But all of this spread is a little bit unique because of the poor ecology in the lake. Last slide. I think I have one left. There it is. This is kind of the conclusion. The water supply promises of CERP, so rosy 25 years ago, turned out to be a mirage. Large-scale aquifer storage is not happening. There is some still discussion of some significant number, up to 55 ASR wells around Lake Okeechobee. That'd be a big help when we get it. The Corps hasn't shown a lot of enthusiasm for that, but it's still on the table. Several of the above-ground reservoirs have been dropped. Some of the smaller ones that were going to deal with special purposes, those aren't there. The project assurances that Ag thought they had, based on the savings clause, have now been kind of taken away by changing the lake schedule. And we're right where we said in 2000 we didn't want to be. The people's use of water was going to be separated from the environment's use of water so they wouldn't be in constant competition. Right now, all everybody's got is the lake, and we're all in constant competition. And the lake's trying to serve the estuary, the Everglades, and the lake itself. In the future, we'll have the EA reservoir. that's labeled in this diagram A2 reservoir. That's the only authorized under construction big time water storage area that is slated to provide water supply for the people and the environment. But with Lake Okeechobee operations as a guide, I mean, we're going to be totally dependent on how the Corps decides to operate that reservoir for water supply in the future. So Ag would probably say they're a little disappointed with where they find themselves in CERP. We still see our future in South Florida. None of this is going to take our water away per se. It may enhance the risk. There's a chance to fix all that with the EA reservoir. So Ag will be participating in the development of the operating plan there. But I don't know if it's going to be helpful to the committee, but I thought it was useful to hear the perspective of the largest single interest group that's directly affected by this, by the CERP project, both in terms of real estate, business opportunity, and employment. That's all I have, Steph. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. We'll move straight on to Ian Nakayama now from the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. Thanks.
Hey there, everybody. Here we go. Hey everyone, my name is Ian Nakayama. I'm a government relations manager at the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, also known by our acronym TRCP, based out of Washington, D.C. I'm presenting on outdoor recreation perspectives on Everglades restoration, and particularly I'm going to try to represent the view of hunters and anglers on Everglades restoration. Next slide, please. So real quick, just some background on the TRCP. We're a hunting and fishing advocacy organization. Our mission is that we're trying to ensure all Americans have quality places to hunt and fish. We are a partnership-based organization with 64 national partners, including the Everglades Foundation, Ducks Unlimited, National Wild Turkey Federation, and Bonefish and Tarpon Trust. Next slide. So the importance of Everglades restoration for hunters and anglers. First, Everglades restoration increases access to recreational opportunities. So increased access and new recreational opportunities are created by Everglades wetland and open water habitat restoration. It improves hydrology, water quality, and habitat structure. Restoring more natural water flow patterns helps to rehydrate marshes and sloughs, making those areas more navigable for new kayaking and paddling opportunities, while reducing unnaturally high or low water levels that can limit access or damage habitats. Restoration improves opportunities for STA duck hunting and freshwater and saltwater fishing. So it's essential for improving hunting and angling conditions in South Florida. Improve water qualities and reductions in harmful discharges and algal blooms also reduce closures for boating and angling. Restoration is essential for not just increasing access to recreational opportunities, but also ensuring recreational opportunities are not reduced due to adverse conditions. I also wanted to highlight the economic impact of the outdoor recreational economies. Everglades restoration has significant benefits to outdoor recreation users. CERP would result in a net present value of $46.5 billion in economic benefits over 50 years, with a return of 4 to 1 on dollars spent on restoration. National Park Service reports that South Florida National Parks and Preserves, which include parts of the Everglades, collectively contribute over $352 million in economic benefits. And this underscores the significant role that restored natural areas play in supporting local economies throughout outdoor recreation. And for many folks, many hunters and anglers, like airboat angling and hunting guides, Everglades restoration is not only essential for the environment, for outdoor recreation economy, but it's also essential to their way of life. It's how they make a living. I also want to highlight that restoration improves habitat for important sport fish and game species. Broad nature of habitats and areas where people recreate in South Florida, from upland hammocks and marl prairies to coral reefs and inshore waters, are all affected by restoration. Each of those ecosystems play a role in sustaining fish and wildlife populations, water quality, and outdoor recreation, like birding, hiking, hunting, fishing, paddling. These depend on the ecological health of these interconnected habitats. For example, excessive phosphorus often leads to vegetation shifts in freshwater wetlands, while large volumes of freshwater discharge harm estuary and salinity levels, impacting seagrass beds and fisheries. Offshore coral reefs suffer from increased turbidity and nutrient stress, A science-based approach to restoration integrates the interconnectedness of these ecosystems. It conserves biodiversity and secures recreational, economic, and cultural benefits. Next slide, please. So, water flow management and its impact on fish and wildlife habitat. Improving flexibility in water management is essential for hunters and anglers. The current management structure leads to trade-offs for hunters and anglers in both high and low water scenarios. What benefits one part of the system may cause harm elsewhere. Lowering Lake Okeechobee water levels can improve lake habitat and reduce harmful discharges in high water level scenarios, but it may lead to saltwater intrusion or degraded nearshore estuarine conditions. While holding water longer in a place like WCA 3A to protect water quality can protect the national park from harmful water moving south, it can also result in prolonged flooding that damages tree islands, displaces wildlife, and impacts tribal communities. These tensions underscore the need for robust, place-based science that helps weigh ecological gains against ecological and social costs. Another thing I wanted to mention, a big challenge that we see is containment of harmful invasive species. The expansion of the range of the python, the growth of lionfish populations in saltwater habitats, and blue tilapia and Mayan cichlid populations in freshwater have all had tangible negative impacts for hunters and anglers. Pythons have been seen eating adult white-tailed deer, and it's believed their predation on fawns has negatively impacted the South Florida whitetail population. Meanwhile, lionfish, tilapia, and the cichlid are preying on juvenile populations of popular sportfish. They're altering native plant communities and impeding the spawning of native fish. Our number one challenge for Everglades restoration is that it must be expedited to provide the greatest benefit to hunters and anglers. The longer it takes to build keystone projects like the EAA Reservoir, WERP, or LOCAR, the longer harmful discharges, high nutrient loads, and unideal water levels will persist, harming essential sport fishing game habitat. Finally, I also want to mention one of the great successes we've seen, but also challenge moving forward in Everglades restoration is using the byproducts of restoration to improve recreational opportunities. We've seen places like SDAs or storage reservoirs turn into prime duck habitat, turn into angling opportunities, birding, kayaking opportunities. But is there an opportunity to harness even more byproducts of restoration to improve recreation and recreational access in the Everglades? This includes thinking of the recreational access component earlier on in the planning process and improving ongoing management for recreational access. Next slide, please. Finally, I want to talk about issues that are most in need of the committee's attention in its 2026 review. One of them, more rigorous assessment of pollution inputs into the system. I've heard from a lot of hunters and anglers who are concerned that especially pollution inputs north of the lake are not getting enough attention. Restoration north of the lake is not getting enough attention. Looking at phosphorus and nitrogen from agricultural, residential, urban areas, golf courses, and whether we are doing enough to address this problem, especially north of the lake. Native plants like sawgrass, which thrive in low phosphorus conditions, are often outcompeted by fast-growing nutrient-loving species like cattails. This shift alters habitat structure, reducing food and shelter for fish, wading birds, and other wildlife. Changes in plant and algae communities ripple through the food web, affecting insects, fish, birds, and top predators. As habitats become more homogeneous and dominated by invasive or opportunistic species, biodiversity suffers, and so do hunting and fishing opportunities. The other thing I want to bring up for the committee's attention is consideration of secondary socioeconomic value of restoration outputs and byproducts. We've seen the utility of SDAs, obviously they're for treating water, but also they offer waterfowl habitat, birding, and hunting opportunities. What are the secondary socioeconomic values beyond just the water quality improvements? How much economic value are they bringing through that outdoor recreation lens? I also recommend that an evaluation like that should look beyond built infrastructure to include restoration efforts that control invasive species. We've seen the utilization of hunters and anglers for invasive species control, like the python derby or the nascent market for lionfish. How much are these invasive species control efforts contributing to this economic value? That's all I have. I want to thank the committee for inviting me to speak.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. And thanks to all the panelists for sharing your thoughts and priority issues. Unfortunately, we don't have any time for follow-up questions by the committee, but if we do have some, we can follow up later. So in this last session, we welcome public comment. I do want to emphasize that even though this is the last session, we do consider very seriously the public comment in shaping the priorities for us to follow in our report. We're going to start with those who've signed up in advance, but if there's any time remaining, we'll take comments up to 3 minutes each from those with raised hands. And you can also, if you miss out, you can also always submit comments to the committee at our study website, and we will read those. So I'm going to hand it over to Stephanie Johnson now to call on speakers, commenters from the public. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. So we have two people who have signed up. The first person is Ben Olson, and the second person is Mike Elfenbein. Ben, are you here?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I had some trouble with my computer, so I'm just on my phone. My name is Ben Olson. I'm a private landowner in Region 2 of the Western Everglades Restoration Project. Though this project started in 2016, and though I've come to find out my family's property was identified in an eminent domain assessment in 2017, we weren't notified of WERP until August of 2022. In the last 3 years or so, I've done well over 1,000 hours of research into the history of this project and the history of the West Feeder Basin of Region 2 of WERP. The Corps' finalized plan, which made it into WERDA 24, is polar opposite of what the natural flowway was in the region. Publicly available land surveys conducted by the Department of Interior in the 1870s and 1930s confirmed that the natural flowway was exactly where the Corps insisted water needed to be severed for WERP, the West Feeder Canal. Likewise, a 1950s hydrology map of southern Hendry County we tracked down, as well as land deeds in the area, further corroborate the Corps' inaccuracy. The Corps did zero due diligence in its initial phases. But beyond that, I filed Freedom of Information Act requests, and what I found was very disturbing. The Corps' bureaucrats were entirely aware that they were flooding tens of thousands of acres of primary panther habitat, and they hid this all under a novel application of indigenous knowledge. The communications show the Corps' tribal liaison went in to dictate to the Seminole representatives exactly what to say to avoid having to address the destruction of private land and panther habitat. They pointed out in the very same communications that the state sponsor would have to go along with the Corps' course of action. The Corps further acknowledged they deliberately neglected to inform private landowners of impacts until the last minute to avoid hassle. Throughout this process, numerous members of both the Corps and the Everglades Task Force themselves insisted the WERP landowners were just loud voices spreading misinformation. That's almost a one-for-one quote from a still sitting task force member. But the reality is, this project was politically pushed antithetically to science. Florida panther impacts are not mentioned in WERP's biological opinion in Region 2 outside of the North Feeder STA, despite private communications acknowledging the WERDA authorized plan floods them out. The abundance of evidence, as well as 100% landowner rejection of this plan, led to the Water Management District agreeing that Region 2 needs to be drastically altered at the August 2024 Water Management Governing Board meeting. They're now planning a state-led alternative on the state's dime. But what the Corps wanted was federally authorized nonetheless. The Corps knew what they had authorized would flood tens of thousands of acres of panther habitat, and they obfuscated it with a claim of indigenous knowledge to get around the need to explain the modeling results and immense contrary evidence publicly. Instead, they decided to only focus on the claim that this portion of WERP restores tribal acreage. They called it a first for the Corps in their own communications. We need change in Everglades restoration. Publicly, we hear in these meetings of the need for transparency and adaptive management. But behind closed doors, the communications I've seen from these FOIA requests show the exact opposite, an intent to censor the public. We need some form of public audit so that the public can engage in more than a 3-minute time limit where Everglades restoration is going to fail. And very quickly, I blew through that because I just wanted to address something Mr. Kniff said about ITEC. He was the Miccosukee representative, and I believe it's imperative to understand what I just gave. I fully support how the Miccosukee tribe of Indians utilized indigenous tribal ecological knowledge. What they did was fantastic. Many of their concerns of how their land is now are what I'm concerned with what WERP will do to my family's property, which we've owned for generations. But what the Corps and the Seminole Tribe of Florida did in WERP wasn't indigenous knowledge. The tribal liaison openly admitted to me that she told tribal representatives what the tribe should ask for in their ITEC request. She merely said they didn't have to listen to her. That alleged request was then used to dictate control over closable culverts on private land to be implemented by WERP, which would have flooded out a township and a half of surrounding land that is all panther habitat. But because they labeled it ITEC, there would be no need for explanation federally. This is the exact opposite of what the Miccosukees did, and I think it's imperative to point out the absolute dangers of ITEC integration. If any of the committee members want the evidence I've collected, I'm happy to provide it to you because unfortunately, everything I've said today isn't misinformation whatsoever, and you are free to reach out to me at any time. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Thanks very much. Next speaker is Mike Elfenbein.
Good afternoon. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Thank you. Wonderful meeting. It's kind of hard to boil down 4 hours of meetings and presentations in 3 minutes. Allow me to introduce myself. Some of you might not know me. My name is Mike Elfenbein. I'm the executive director of the Cypress chapter of the Isaac Walton League of America. We are a 54-year-old chapter of a 103-year-old conservation organization. We were created specifically in the local chapter to advocate for the creation of Big Cypress National Preserve. I personally serve on 3 stakeholder advisory groups for the FWC, including aquatic plant management, deer, and bear. I have been active in conservation efforts throughout Florida for the last 25 years. I'm actively involved in water quality projects, advocacy programs, youth programs, fishing and hunting advocacy, and was an integral part of the introduction of the Second Amendment to the state constitution. I tell you all that because it was obvious that my lack of inclusion today and only the 3 minutes to give you this message wasn't qualified. So I wanted to share with you guys something that I thought was most important in what you're doing, and that is the inability to quantify socio-political aspects of this conversation to your scientific analysis. Restoration will, in fact, change the landscape. And in doing so, it's going to change how we access and use our public lands. While you might have heard from organizations who don't participate in the Everglades on a daily basis, wildlife populations throughout the Everglades, in spite of restoration efforts, are disappearing before our very eyes. 2 million acres of land from Big Cypress to Everglades National Park lack any kind of wildlife. Significantly, wildlife that sustains endangered species like the apex predator, the Florida panther. There is no wildlife in Conservation Area 3A. Lake Okeechobee is losing its bass populations. Its ducks that we tout at STAs are gone from the lake, and what's left of them go to the STAs. I have so many comments and such little time to share with you. There was a lot of positive in today, but I'm stuck at the end of this meeting with a representation of what might be issues for stakeholders in the system not being clearly defined. And so I'd love an opportunity to share those things with you in greater detail before my 30 seconds is up, as one of the only 2 public speakers that consistently attends all of these meetings. Tim Breen said some things today that stuck with me, and I think his comments today were probably the most fitting. The most important of all was Adam Gelber's comments about walkabouts. And I think that it's important that if you all are going to provide information, and your words are very important, as others said, that is going to define Everglades restoration in the future, I think you all should know more of the Everglades than you do before making those recommendations. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much. The next comment is from Steve Davis.
Thanks, Stephanie. Sound check.
All good.
Great. I want to, first of all, thank the committee for your work, for embarking on another 2-year study. We obviously value the feedback that we get from the CERP committee, and it also helps to shape science, long-term science here in South Florida focused on the ecosystem. And I'd like to go back to an earlier panel with recommendations for the committee to consider moving forward, particularly 2. One is the impacts of saltwater intrusion in coastal wetlands around South Florida. And this committee years ago pointed to the need to understand issues like peak collapse that led to almost a decade of research now to really help us understand how that process sort of translates moving forward, the drivers, the mechanisms that are underlying the importance of that with regard to wetland vulnerability. And so I think continued attention on that is needed because we don't have all the answers and we don't have all the empirical information. So I believe it was Kevin Kniff earlier that mentioned the importance of long-term ecological research that's been based at Florida International University since the year 2000 and how that's really helped to feed this process. So I think continued coordination with those efforts is needed. I'd also like to point out the need to look at both terrestrial and aquatic heat waves in shaping not only these habitats across the ecosystem, but also the very species, metabolism, behavior, how prey bases are affected for a variety of indicator species, as well as how these heat waves are affecting biogeochemical processes. Again, not only on land in tree islands, but also in our aquatic environments, marshes, estuaries, lakes, et cetera. And to another point that was made about how we're really in a race to keep up with development. And that's certainly the case in Miami-Dade County, where we're seeing lands that were earmarked for Everglades restoration projects that are at risk of being developed and therefore not available for water storage, water treatment, et cetera. The last thing I think the committee should also be made aware of a proposed effort to mine limestone aggregate to a depth of about 20 feet, about 1,000 feet immediately north of the Everglades Agricultural Area Reservoir, where we're trying to put water on the land surface. And I think many of us are scrambling to understand the potential technical issues related to that. We're just in a situation where there's a dearth of information available. So that would be my last recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to, oh, are you good for me to take over now, Stephanie? All right. So thanks for those public comments. We will take them into account when we are planning our focal study areas over the next year. And thanks to all our speakers and panelists today for your helpful input, not just on the previous report, but on priority areas for us to consider moving forward. The committee will consider all of this as input as we plan our information gathering strategy for the next year. We'll be having some additional public meetings as part of our information gathering sessions. And you can find the dates of those on our website. Our next meeting is on this slide, June 24th and 25th of this year, location to be determined. Several committee members, including myself, are going to be at GEAR, either presenting or watching other presentations. So please say hello, and we'll also make a point of seeking some of you out. And we look forward to meeting you in Florida in late June. Thank you, everyone, for your really amazing preparation in providing us input on this. Not a single one of you was a slacker. You all did your homework and were very well prepared, and I really appreciate that. Is there anything else, Stephanie?
No, that's it. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everyone.